Hi, I'm Carmen Rodriguez. 3 weeks ago, I watched my 8-year-old daughter Zoe walk across that stage to accept her Regional Young Scientists Achievement Award, wearing a torn dress held together with safety pins. The woman who destroyed her special outfit sat in the front row, dabbing fake tears with a tissue like she was the victim. That woman was my mother-in-law, Diane Rodriguez. But what Diane didn't know was that I had been recording everything, and by the time that ceremony ended, her perfect reputation would be in pieces just like my daughter's dress. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any Saturday, in our Phoenix townhouse. Zoe bounced into the kitchen wearing her favorite unicorn pajamas, chattering about how excited she was for the ceremony later that afternoon. Her project on desert plants had beaten out 43 other entries across the state, and this was her moment to shine. I had been planning this day for weeks, making sure everything would be perfect for my little scientist. "Mama, can I wear my hair in a bun like a real researcher?" Zoe asked, spinning around the kitchen island where I was making her favorite strawberry pancakes. "Absolutely, baby girl. You're going to look so professional and beautiful," I said, flipping the pancakes with a smile that came straight from my heart. This award meant everything to Zoe. She had spent months researching how cacti store water, creating detailed charts and diagrams that even impressed her teacher, Mrs. Henderson. Marcus was already dressed in his best khakis and button-down shirt, the same outfit he wore to church and job interviews. He worked long hours at his father's auto repair shop, coming home covered in grease and exhaustion, but he never missed anything important for Zoe. Today, he kept checking his watch and adjusting his collar nervously. "Carmen, what time did you tell my parents to be here?" he asked, straightening the same picture frame on the mantel for the third time. 2:30. "The ceremony starts at 4, so that gives us plenty of time to get there and find good seats," I replied, though something in his tone made me glance up from the stove. Marcus had that look he got when his family was involved in our plans. A mixture of hope and dread that I had learned to recognize over our 10 years of marriage. Diane Rodriguez had very specific opinions about how things should be done, and those opinions always seemed to involve correcting something I had already arranged. Last Christmas, she had rewrapped all the presents I had carefully prepared because my bows weren't festive enough. At Zoe's 6th birthday party, she had quietly moved all my decorations to different spots while I was cutting cake, claiming the colors clashed with her outfit. She never made a scene, never raised her voice, but somehow her way always became the way things ended up. "She's probably going to want to take 1,000 pictures," Marcus continued, now adjusting the same frame in the opposite direction. "You know how she gets with Zoe's achievements." I did know. Diane had a way of inserting herself into every milestone, every celebration, positioning herself as the grandmother who made it all possible. She would post the photos on her Facebook page with captions about how proud she was to have such a smart granddaughter, forgetting to mention the countless nights I had stayed up helping Zoe with research, or the money we had saved to buy her the microscope she used for her project. The special outfit hung in Zoe's closet upstairs, still wrapped in the garment bag from the department store. I had saved for 3 months to buy that navy blue dress with the matching blazer. It wasn't expensive by most standards, but for our tight budget, it represented weeks of skipping coffee dates with friends and buying generic groceries. The dress was elegant and age-appropriate, with tiny pearl buttons and a subtle floral pattern embroidered along the hem. When Zoe tried it on at the store, she had gasped and said she felt like a, quote, real scientist lady. By 2 o'clock, Zoe was dressed and ready, her hair perfectly styled in the bun she had requested. The dress fit her beautifully, and the matching blazer made her look mature and confident. She stood in front of the hallway mirror, practicing her thank you speech and adjusting her little gold watch, a gift from my sister Lucia. "Do I look official, Mama?" she asked, straightening her shoulders and putting on her most serious expression. "You look absolutely perfect, sweetheart. Like someone who changes the world with science," I told her, kneeling down to her level and smoothing a strand of hair that had escaped from her bun. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:30. Diane was never late, and she was never early. She believed punctuality was a reflection of character, which she mentioned frequently to people who didn't share her precise timing standards. I opened the door to find her standing on our doorstep in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car payment, holding a large gift bag and wearing her camera smile. "There's my brilliant granddaughter," Diane exclaimed, stepping past me without her usual air-kiss greeting. Her eyes immediately went to Zoe's outfit, and I watched her expression shift slightly. It was subtle, the way her smile tightened around the edges and her eyebrows raised just a fraction. "Well, isn't that nice?" she said in the tone she used when she wanted to say something else entirely. "Very practical." Robert followed behind her, carrying a small bouquet of flowers for Zoe and wearing his uncomfortable dress shoes that squeaked against our hardwood floors. He was a kind man who worked with his hands and preferred the honest simplicity of fixing engines to navigating the complicated social dynamics his wife seemed to thrive on. "Congratulations, kiddo," he said to Zoe, handing her the flowers with genuine warmth. "Your dad told me all about your project. Sounds like you really know your stuff about plants." Brianna arrived 15 minutes later with her two boys, Tyler and Mason, both under 5 and both immediately drawn to every breakable object in our living room. She worked as a dental hygienist and lived in the same neighborhood as Diane, which meant they saw each other almost daily and shared opinions about everything from child rearing to home decoration. "Oh my gosh, Zoe, you look so grown up," Brianna said, pulling out her phone to take pictures. "But honey, are you sure about that blazer? It's going to be so hot in the convention center. Maybe just the dress would be better?" I felt my jaw tighten. The blazer was part of what made the outfit special, what made Zoe feel professional and important. But before I could respond, Diane was nodding in agreement. "Brianna's absolutely right. We don't want you overheating during your big moment." "Let's lose the jacket," Diane said, already reaching for the blazer's buttons before I could speak. "Actually, the air conditioning is usually pretty strong at the convention center," I interjected, stepping slightly closer to Zoe. "And she specifically wanted to wear the complete outfit. She feels more confident with the blazer." Diane's hands paused, but she didn't step back. "Carmen, dear, I think we know what's best for comfort. It's going to be a long ceremony, and we want Zoe to be relaxed and natural." There it was, the gentle correction delivered with a smile that somehow made me feel like I was being unreasonable for having an opinion about my own daughter's clothing. Marcus was adjusting that same picture frame again, and Brianna was chasing Mason away from our coffee table, but I could feel the familiar tension building in the room. "Mama, I want to keep my blazer on," Zoe said quietly, looking between her grandmother and me, with the confusion of a child caught between adults who were disagreeing without actually arguing. "Of course you do, sweetheart," I said, putting my hand on her shoulder. "It's your special day, and you should wear exactly what makes you feel confident." Diane's smile became even brighter, which was somehow more unsettling than if she had frowned. "Well, we'll see how you feel once we get there. Sometimes children change their minds when they realize what's practical." The drive to the Phoenix Convention Center took 25 minutes, with our small caravan of cars following Diane's luxury sedan. She had insisted on driving separately so she could make a stop to pick up a special surprise for Zoe, though she had been mysterious about what that surprise might be. Marcus rode with his parents while I drove with Zoe, grateful for a few minutes of peace before the ceremony. "Mama, why doesn't Grandma Diane like my blazer?" Zoe asked from the back seat, her voice small and uncertain. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, seeing her carefully arranged hair and the worried expression that had replaced her earlier excitement. This was exactly what I had hoped to avoid. Zoe feeling self-conscious about her appearance on what should be one of the proudest days of her young life. "She does like it, baby. Sometimes grown-ups just have different ideas about things, but that doesn't mean your ideas are wrong. You look absolutely beautiful, and more importantly, you feel confident and ready to accept your award," I told her, trying to inject as much certainty into my voice as possible. But what if she's right? What if I get too hot and sweaty and look silly on stage?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
My heart broke a little. 20 minutes in the car with family politics, and my confident little scientist was already doubting herself. I pulled into the convention center parking lot and turned around to face her directly. Zoe Rodriguez, you are brilliant, beautiful, and brave. You earned this award because your brain is amazing and your project was outstanding. Whether you wear that blazer or not, whether you get hot or cold, whether your hair stays perfect or gets messy, you are still the same incredible girl who beat 43 other students with her research. Nobody can take that away from you. She nodded, her confidence returning slightly, and we walked toward the building where the rest of the family was already gathering near the entrance. Diane was holding the mysterious gift bag and checking her lipstick in her compact mirror. When she saw us approaching, she immediately focused on Zoe again. There she is. Now, before we go inside, I have something special for my award-winning granddaughter, Diane announced, presenting the gift bag with a flourish that drew the attention of several other families walking by. Zoe's face lit up as she opened the bag and pulled out a pale pink cardigan with tiny rhinestone buttons and lace trim around the sleeves. It was clearly expensive and undeniably pretty, but it was also completely wrong for the sophisticated look Zoe had been so excited about. It's beautiful, Grandma, Zoe said politely, though I could see the confusion in her eyes. I thought it would be perfect over your dress, Diane continued, taking the cardigan and holding it up against Zoe's outfit. Much more appropriate for a young lady, and it will photograph so much better than that bulky blazer. The word appropriate hit me like a slap. My daughter's carefully chosen, saved-for outfit was somehow inappropriate, but this frilly pink cardigan that turned her from a serious young scientist into a doll was better? I felt my face flush with anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. That's very thoughtful of you, Diane, but Zoe already has her complete outfit planned, I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. Oh, Carmen, don't be so rigid, it's just clothing. The important thing is that Zoe feels comfortable and looks her best, Diane replied, already starting to remove Zoe's blazer despite my objection. I am comfortable, Zoe said, trying to hold onto her blazer sleeves. I like my scientist outfit. But Diane was persistent, and she was stronger than an 8-year-old. Within moments, the blazer was off and the pink cardigan was being slipped over Zoe's arms. It clashed horribly with the navy dress, completely changing the sophisticated look into something that belonged at a tea party rather than an academic achievement ceremony. There, Diane said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Much better. More feminine and sweet. I looked at my daughter's face and saw the exact moment her confidence cracked. She stared down at the cardigan that transformed her from a serious researcher into a little girl playing dress-up, and I watched her shoulders slump slightly. Diane, please put her blazer back on, I said, no longer worried about keeping my voice perfectly pleasant. Carmen, you're being dramatic. She looks lovely, and this cardigan is much more expensive than that jacket anyway. Quality makes a difference, Diane replied, folding Zoe's blazer and tucking it under her arm like she had just improved everyone's day. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about clothing at all. This was about control, about who got to make decisions about my daughter, about who had the right to override my choices as her mother. Diane had spent years making subtle corrections to my parenting, my hosting, my gift-giving, and my family traditions. But this was different. This was my daughter's moment, and she was stealing it right in front of the convention center entrance. Give me back my daughter's blazer, I said, my voice now clearly showing my anger. Lower your voice, Carmen. People are starting to stare, Diane hissed, glancing around at the other families who were indeed beginning to notice our tension. I don't care who's staring. That blazer is part of her chosen outfit for her awards ceremony, and you have no right to change it, I replied, reaching for the blazer she was clutching. Diane pulled it away from my reach, her pleasant mask finally slipping to reveal the steel underneath. I have every right to help my granddaughter look appropriate. You clearly don't understand what's suitable for a formal occasion. The words hung in the air between us like a declaration of war. Around us, other families continued walking toward the entrance, but I could feel the weight of their curious glances. Marcus was standing frozen between his mother and his wife, Robert was staring at his shoes, and Brianna was pretending to be fascinated by something on her phone. But it was Zoe's face that broke my heart. She stood there in that ridiculous pink cardigan, looking lost and small, her excitement about the ceremony completely overshadowed by the adult conflict swirling around her. Her carefully styled hair was beginning to come loose from all the clothing changes, and her gold watch seemed to shine mockingly against the lace-trimmed sleeves. "Mama, can we just go inside?" she whispered, tugging on my hand. "I don't want to be late." Looking at my daughter's disappointed face, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Diane, I'm asking you one more time to return my daughter's blazer so she can wear the complete outfit she chose for her awards ceremony." "Carmen, put that phone away. You're making a scene over nothing," Diane snapped, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes as she realized I was documenting this moment. "I'm making a scene? You're the one who forcibly changed my daughter's clothing against both our wishes in a public parking lot," I replied, keeping the phone steady as I spoke. That's when Diane made the choice that would haunt her for months to come. Instead of handing back the blazer or trying to de-escalate the situation, she threw the blazer on the ground and stepped on it with her cream-colored heel, grinding it into the asphalt. "There, now you don't have to worry about it anymore," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. The blazer that I had saved for months to buy, that represented so much more than just clothing, was now dirty and torn. Zoe gasped and started to cry, not just from seeing her special outfit destroyed, but from witnessing this level of cruelty from someone who was supposed to love her. I kept recording as I knelt down to pick up the damaged blazer, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. The fabric was torn where Diane's heel had caught it, and there were black scuff marks across the back. "Why did you do that, Grandma?" Zoe asked through her tears, staring at the woman she had trusted and adored. Diane looked down at her granddaughter's tear-stained face and seemed to realize, for just a moment, the gravity of what she had done. But instead of apologizing, instead of taking responsibility, she doubled down. "Stop being so dramatic, Zoe. It's just a piece of clothing. Grandma got you something much prettier anyway," she said, adjusting the pink cardigan that now looked even more ridiculous against Zoe's navy dress. I stood up, still recording, still shaking with anger, but now with something else too. Clarity. For years I had made excuses for Diane's behavior, had convinced myself that her corrections and criticisms came from a place of caring. I had told myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But watching my daughter's face crumble, as her grandmother destroyed something special, and then dismissed her feelings about it, I finally understood what I was really dealing with. This wasn't about blazers or cardigans or appropriate clothing. This was about a woman who needed to control every situation, who couldn't bear to let anyone else make decisions, even about their own children. "Marcus," I called to my husband, who was still standing frozen like a deer in headlights. "We're going inside. With or without your family." I took Zoe's hand and started walking toward the convention center entrance, the torn blazer clutched in my other hand. Behind me, I could hear Diane's voice rising as she called after us. "Carmen, don't be ridiculous. Come back here right now. You're ruining Zoe's special day with this tantrum." But I didn't turn around. I had spent 10 years turning around, apologizing, smoothing things over, pretending that Diane's behavior was normal family dynamics. Not today. Today was about Zoe, and I was going to make sure she got the recognition she deserved, even if she had to accept it wearing a torn dress, held together with safety pins. As we walked through the convention center doors, I felt something shift inside me. The little voice that had whispered, "Keep the peace," for so many years, was finally quiet. In its place was something stronger, clearer, and much more dangerous to people who relied on others staying silent. I was done being quiet. Inside the Phoenix Convention Center, the air conditioning hit us like a wall of Arctic air, making me grateful that Zoe still had some kind of covering over her dress, even if it was that ridiculous pink cardigan that made her look like she was heading to a Victorian tea party instead of accepting a science award. The lobby was filled with families gathering around registration tables, children in their best clothes clutching certificates and small trophies, parents beaming with pride as they adjusted ties and smoothed hair. We looked nothing like those perfect family units. Zoe's eyes were still red-rimmed from crying. Her carefully styled bun was coming loose, and she kept glancing down at the pink cardigan with confusion and disappointment. I was clutching her torn blazer like evidence of a crime, my phone still recording everything. and my hands were visibly shaking with adrenaline and rage. Marcus finally caught up to us at the registration table, his face flushed, and his usually neat hair disheveled. Behind him I could see Diane marching through the entrance with Robert trailing behind her, looking like he wished he could disappear into the polished concrete floor. Brianna was corralling her 2 boys while shooting worried glances between her mother and her sister-in-law. "Carmen, we need to talk about this," Marcus said, reaching for my arm as I signed Zoe in at the registration table. "Mom didn't mean to upset anyone. She just wanted to help." I turned to look at my husband, really look at him, and saw something that made my stomach drop. He genuinely believed what he was saying. After watching his mother deliberately destroy our daughter's clothing and dismiss Zoe's tears, he was still making excuses for her behavior. The realization hit me like ice water in my veins. She stepped on a blazer that I saved 3 months to buy and ground it into the asphalt with her heel, I said quietly, holding up the damaged garment. "In what universe is that helping?" She was frustrated. "You were both getting heated, and she probably just reacted without thinking," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he seemed to realize how weak that excuse sounded. The registration volunteer, a cheerful woman in her 60s wearing a badge that read Mrs. Patterson, handed Zoe a name tag and a program. She took one look at our family drama and her smile became slightly strained. "Is everything all right, honey?" she asked Zoe directly, ignoring the adults entirely. "You look a little upset." "My grandma tore my special blazer," Zoe said simply, her honesty cutting through all the adult attempts to minimize what had happened. "It was part of my scientist outfit." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows raised, and she glanced at the torn blazer in my hands, then at the pink cardigan that clearly didn't match Zoe's navy dress. "Well, that's terrible. You know what, sweetheart? I have a sewing kit in my volunteer bag. Maybe we can fix that blazer enough for you to wear it during the ceremony." Before I could respond, Diane appeared beside us like a storm cloud, her cream suit still immaculate and her smile razor-sharp. "Oh, that won't be necessary. She has a lovely cardigan that's much more appropriate anyway. We're all set." Mrs. Patterson looked between Diane and me, clearly sensing the tension but unsure how to navigate it. "Well, it's really up to the family, I suppose." "It's up to Zoe," I said firmly. "This is her ceremony, and she should wear what makes her feel confident and proud. She's 8 years old, Carmen." "She doesn't know what's appropriate for formal occasions," Diane replied, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while delivering an insult. That's when something snapped inside me. Not the blazer incident, not the controlling behavior, but the dismissal of my daughter's intelligence and autonomy. Zoe was brilliant enough to win a regional science award, but apparently not smart enough to choose her own clothing. "Zoe?" I said, kneeling down to her level and ignoring everyone else around us. "What do you want to wear when you go up on that stage?" "My blazer," she said immediately. "Even if it's torn, it's still my scientist outfit." Mrs. Patterson smiled and pulled a small sewing kit from her oversized volunteer tote bag. "Let's see what we can do, shall we?" 20 minutes later, we were seated in the auditorium with Zoe wearing her navy blazer, held together with strategic safety pins that Mrs. Patterson had somehow made look almost intentional. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and she sat up straighter wearing it than she had in that pink cardigan. The ceremony itself was beautiful. 44 young scientists from across Arizona were recognized for their outstanding research projects, and when Zoe's name was called for first place in the elementary division, she walked across that stage with her head held high and her safety-pinned blazer glinting under the stage lights. I cried watching her shake hands with the district superintendent and pose for photos with her certificate and trophy. She looked so professional, so confident, so proud of her achievement. The torn blazer that Diane had meant as a symbol of my inadequacy had become something else entirely. Proof that my daughter was strong enough to succeed, even when the people who should support her tried to tear her down. But as we gathered in the lobby afterward for family photos, I could see Diane positioning herself for damage control. She swept Zoe into a hug that was clearly meant for the cameras, gushing about how proud she was of her brilliant granddaughter. She posed for selfies with Zoe's trophy, posted them immediately to Facebook with captions about family achievements, and gradually worked to insert herself into every photo opportunity. "Isn't it wonderful how everything worked out?" she said to a group of other grandparents who had gathered to admire the children's awards. Zoe looked absolutely perfect up there. Sometimes these little wardrobe malfunctions just add character to the day. Wardrobe malfunction. As if the blazer had spontaneously torn itself, instead of being deliberately destroyed by a woman who couldn't stand being told no. I watched Diane rewrite the story in real time, turning herself from the villain into the supportive grandmother who helped save the day. That night, after we had returned home and Zoe was finally asleep with her trophy on her nightstand and her certificate taped to her bedroom wall, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone. The video I had recorded in the parking lot was clear and damning. Diane's face was visible, her actions were obvious, and her words were audible. I had everything I needed to show people what had really happened. But I also had 10 years of marriage to Marcus, 10 years of family dinners and holiday celebrations, 10 years of telling myself that keeping the peace was more important than being right. Sharing that video would detonate our family relationships like a nuclear bomb. Was I ready for that level of destruction? Marcus found me there at midnight, still holding my phone and staring at the video that could change everything. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me with the careful movements of someone who knows he's in trouble but isn't sure why. "I keep thinking about today," I said, not looking up from the phone screen, "about how quickly you defended her. Carmen, she's my mother. Family is complicated. Family shouldn't include destroying an 8-year-old's clothing and then gaslighting her about it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table in the nervous pattern he had developed over the years whenever his family came up in conversation. "She apologized to Zoe before we left. She said she was sorry the blazer got damaged." I finally looked up at him, studying his face in the dim kitchen light. "She said she was sorry it got damaged. Not that she damaged it. Not that she was wrong to step on it. She apologized for the blazer existing in a damaged state, like it happened by itself." You're parsing her words pretty carefully. I'm parsing them accurately. There's a difference. We sat in silence while the central air cycled on and off, the sound filling the space between us where a real conversation should have been happening. I could see Marcus struggling, torn between loyalty to his mother and recognition that something had gone very wrong today. "What do you want me to do, Carmen? Cut off contact with my parents because of one bad afternoon?" That question revealed everything I needed to know about how Marcus saw this situation. One bad afternoon. Not a pattern of controlling behavior that had been escalating for years. Not a fundamental disrespect for my role as Zoe's mother. Not a willingness to hurt a child to prove a point about authority. "I want you to acknowledge that what she did was wrong," I said quietly. "I want you to recognize that this wasn't about clothing, or appropriateness, or helping Zoe. This was about control. She likes things done a certain way. She's always been particular. Particular people don't destroy other people's belongings when they don't get their way, Marcus. Abusive people do that." The word hung between us like a live wire. Marcus recoiled as if I had slapped him, his face going through several emotions before settling on defensive anger. "That's a hell of a thing to say about my mother. It's an accurate thing to say about her behavior. She loves Zoe. Everything she does comes from wanting what's best for her granddaughter." I stood up, the chair scraping against the kitchen floor with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet house. "Marcus, I recorded the whole thing. I have video of your mother forcibly removing Zoe's blazer, throwing it on the ground, and stepping on it while Zoe cried. I have audio of her dismissing Zoe's feelings and calling her dramatic for being upset. If you saw that exact same behavior from a stranger at a playground, what would you call it?" Marcus didn't answer, but I could see the conflict playing out on his face. His loyalty to his mother was warring with the evidence of what she had actually done, and he was discovering that reality had sharp edges that cut through family mythology. "Let me see the video," he said finally. I handed him my phone and watched his face as he saw the incident through the lens of a camera instead of through the filter of family dynamics. I saw the exact moment when he stopped making excuses, when his expression shifted from defensive to horrified. "Jesus," he whispered, watching his mother grind the blazer under her heel, while Zoe sobbed in the background. I didn't realize it was that bad. It was worse than that bad, Marcus. This was calculated cruelty, designed to punish me for standing up to her, and Zoe was collateral damage. He watched the video twice more, his face growing paler each time. When he finally handed the phone back to me, his hands were shaking slightly. What are you going to do with that? I don't know yet, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. The next morning brought a flood of Facebook posts from Diane, all featuring the photos she had taken at the ceremony. Picture after picture of her with Zoe, her with the trophy, her beaming beside her brilliant granddaughter. The captions were masterpieces of selective storytelling. So proud of my granddaughter Zoe for winning first place in the regional science competition. What an amazing day celebrating our little Einstein. Family moments like these are what life is all about. Grandmother's love means never missing the important milestones. Zoe looked absolutely beautiful at her award ceremony today. These are the memories we treasure forever. Blessed to have such an intelligent and accomplished granddaughter. Today's ceremony was perfect in every way. So grateful for family. Perfect in every way. I stared at that caption for a long time, thinking about how easily the truth could be erased and replaced with a more palatable version. In Diane's Facebook reality, yesterday had been a flawless celebration of family love and support. The torn blazer, the tears, the public confrontation had been edited out of existence. But I wasn't the only one who remembered what really happened. Mrs. Patterson, the volunteer who had helped repair Zoe's blazer, had friend requested me on Facebook that morning with a message. Dear Carmen, I've been volunteering at these ceremonies for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened to your family yesterday. That little girl handled herself with such grace and dignity, despite the adults around her behaving badly. I hope you're all doing better today. That video you took might be important someday. People who act like that usually don't stop with one incident. She was right, and somewhere deep down, I think I had always known it. This wasn't about a blazer or a cardigan, or even about clothing at all. This was about power and control, and a woman who had spent decades getting her way through a combination of social pressure and emotional manipulation. I spent the rest of the morning going through my memories of family interactions with Diane, but now I was looking at them through a different lens. The Christmas when she had rewrapped all the presents wasn't about making things look better. It was about demonstrating that my efforts weren't good enough. The birthday party decoration incident wasn't about color coordination. It was about showing everyone that she was in charge. Every helpful suggestion, every gentle correction, every time she had overruled my parenting decisions or social choices had been part of a larger pattern of establishing dominance. And I had spent 10 years enabling it by refusing to make waves, by prioritizing family harmony over standing up for myself and my daughter. But yesterday something had changed. Maybe it was seeing Zoe's face when her special outfit was destroyed. Maybe it was watching Diane's satisfaction as she ground that blazer under her heel. Maybe it was the realization that Marcus would always choose his mother's feelings over mine unless forced to confront the truth. Whatever it was, I felt different. The constant low-level anxiety that I had carried around family events was gone, replaced by something clearer and more dangerous. I wasn't afraid of Diane anymore. I was angry, and anger was much more useful than fear. That afternoon, Zoe came home from school still glowing with pride from sharing her award with her classmates. Her teacher had made a special announcement about her achievement, and the principal had asked her to display her project in the main hallway for other students to see. "Mama," Mrs. Henderson said, "my blazer looked very professional yesterday, even with the pins." Zoe told me as she hung her backpack on its hook by the kitchen door. She said real scientists have to be resourceful when equipment gets damaged. Out of the mouths of babes, Mrs. Henderson had managed to turn Diane's act of destruction into a lesson about resilience and problem solving. My daughter's teacher had given her exactly what Diane had tried to steal, the sense that she could handle challenges and still succeed. Mrs. Henderson is absolutely right, I told Zoe, pulling her into a hug that lasted longer than usual. Real scientists adapt and overcome obstacles. just like you did yesterday." That evening, Marcus came home from work, looking like he hadn't slept, which he probably hadn't. We had talked until almost 3 in the morning about the video, about his mother's behavior, about the patterns we had both been ignoring for years. "I called Mom today," he said without preamble, settling heavily into his favorite chair in our living room. "I told her she owed you and Zoe an apology for what happened yesterday. And she said she didn't know what I was talking about. She said yesterday was a beautiful celebration, and she couldn't understand why you were trying to create drama where none existed." I felt my jaw clench. Of course that's what she said. Gaslighting was as natural to Diane as breathing, and she had been doing it so long that I wondered if she even remembered what the truth looked like. "Did you tell her about the video?" I mentioned that you had recorded the incident. She said that was very concerning, that you seemed to be looking for problems instead of focusing on Zoe's achievement. "So I'm the problem for documenting what she did, not her for doing it in the first place." Marcus nodded miserably. "She wants to have a family dinner this weekend too, clear the air. She thinks we can all sit down and work through this misunderstanding like adults." I almost laughed. A family dinner where Diane could control the environment, set the agenda, and gradually wear down my resistance until I apologized for being unreasonable. It was the same script she had been using for years, and it had always worked before. "No," I said simply. "Carmen, she's trying to make an effort. She's trying to regain control of the narrative. There's a difference." Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. "What if she's right? What if I'm only seeing this one-sided because you're upset?" The question hit me like a physical blow. After everything we had talked about, after watching the video multiple times, after acknowledging that his mother's behavior was wrong, he was still willing to doubt my version of reality in favor of hers. "Marcus, do you believe what you saw in that video?" "Yes, but..." "There's no but. Either you believe your own eyes or you believe your mother's rewrite of history. You can't do both. I just think maybe there's more to the story than what the video shows." And there it was. The final piece of understanding that I had been avoiding. Marcus would always give his mother the benefit of the doubt, would always assume there were extenuating circumstances that justified her behavior, would always prioritize keeping peace with her, over protecting his wife and daughter from her toxicity. I wasn't just fighting Diane. I was fighting an entire family system that had been built around managing her emotions and avoiding her displeasure. Everyone had learned to walk on eggshells, to anticipate her reactions, to adjust their behavior to prevent her outbursts. And when someone refused to play by those rules, the entire system turned against them to restore the balance. "I need some air," I said, standing up and reaching for my car keys. "Where are you going?" To think. I drove to Desert Ridge Park and sat on a bench overlooking the small pond where families brought their children to feed ducks and play on the playground equipment. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me why I had fallen in love with Arizona when Marcus and I first moved here. That had been 10 years ago, when we were young and optimistic and convinced that love could overcome any obstacle. I had known that Diane was challenging, but I thought I could win her over with patience and persistence. I thought if I just tried hard enough, did everything right, proved my worth as a wife and mother, she would eventually accept me as part of the family. Instead, I had spent a decade shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me, apologizing for taking up room, and teaching my daughter by example that keeping other people comfortable was more important than standing up for yourself. But yesterday had changed something fundamental. Watching Diane destroy something precious to Zoe just to prove a point had finally shown me the truth that I had been avoiding. This wasn't about me not being good enough or trying hard enough. This was about a woman who saw relationships as zero-sum games where someone had to lose for her to win. I pulled out my phone and opened the video one more time, studying Diane's face as she ground that blazer under her heel. There was no anger there, no loss of control, no regret. There was satisfaction. She had enjoyed hurting us, had felt powerful in that moment of destruction. That's when I knew what I had to do. Not because I wanted revenge or drama or conflict, but because my daughter was watching. Zoe was learning from every adult interaction she witnessed, absorbing lessons about power and relationships and self-worth that would shape her for the rest of her life. I could teach her that some people's feelings matter more than others, that keeping peace is more important than standing up for yourself, that love comes with conditions and can be withdrawn when you don't comply with expectations. Or I could teach her that she has value, that her choices matter, that people who love you don't hurt you to prove points, and that it's possible to stand up to bullies even when they're family members. The choice was actually simple, even if the consequences would be complicated. The family dinner invitation arrived 3 days later, not through a phone call or text message, but via an elegant cream-colored card with gold script lettering delivered to our front door by Robert himself. He stood on our porch wearing his weekend jeans and an expression of profound discomfort, holding the envelope like it might explode. "Diane wanted to make sure you got this personally," he said when I opened the door, not quite meeting my eyes. "She's been planning all week." I took the card and read the formal invitation to Sunday dinner at their Scottsdale home, complete with a handwritten note about healing family bonds and moving forward in love and understanding. The whole thing felt like a performance, an elaborate production designed to make me look unreasonable if I declined. "She's making her famous pot roast," Robert added weakly, as if the promise of good food might somehow erase the memory of his wife destroying my daughter's clothing in a public parking lot. "Robert," I said gently, because I had always liked Marcus's father despite his enabling of his wife's behavior, "do you think what happened at the ceremony was okay?" His shoulders sagged, and for a moment he looked older than his 68 years. "I think Diane gets a little worked up sometimes, and maybe she didn't handle things the best way. She stepped on an 8-year-old's blazer and ground it into the pavement while the child cried. That's not getting worked up. That's deliberate cruelty." Robert's hands fidgeted with his car keys, and I could see him struggling between loyalty to his wife and recognition of what he had witnessed. "Diane says you recorded her without permission. That's got her pretty upset." "I recorded someone destroying my daughter's property. The fact that it was Diane doing the destroying doesn't make the recording inappropriate. She thinks maybe you were looking for an excuse to cause problems." And there it was. I was the problem, not the person whose behavior was so outrageous that it needed to be documented. I was creating drama by preserving evidence of drama that someone else had created. "Please tell Diane that we won't be attending dinner on Sunday," I said, handing the invitation back to Robert. "We're not ready to pretend that what happened was normal family conflict." Robert looked like I had just told him Christmas was canceled. "Carmen, she's really trying to make things right. She spent $50 on groceries for this dinner. $50 on groceries was supposed to compensate for traumatizing my daughter and then gaslighting us about it. The economics of forgiveness, according to Diane Rodriguez, seem to be that any gesture, no matter how small, should be sufficient to erase any offense, no matter how large. The amount she spent on dinner doesn't change what she did to Zoe," I replied. "Actions have consequences, and one of those consequences is that we're not comfortable pretending everything is fine when it isn't." After Robert left, looking deflated and confused, I found Marcus in our garage organizing tools that were already perfectly organized. It was his stress response, creating order in small spaces when the larger world felt chaotic. "Your dad delivered a dinner invitation," I said, leaning against the doorframe and watching him rearrange the same wrench set for the 3rd time. "I figured Mom would want to do something like that. She always thinks food fixes everything." I told him we wouldn't be going. Marcus's hands stilled on the wrenches. "Carmen, maybe we should at least try. She's making an effort. She's making a production. There's a difference. What if this is her way of apologizing? What if she's planning to acknowledge what happened and make things right?" I studied my husband's face, seeing the hope there that this could all be resolved with one awkward but healing family meal. Part of me envied his optimism, his ability to believe that people fundamentally wanted to do the right thing. "Marcus, when in the 10 years you've known your mother, has she ever acknowledged wrongdoing and apologized without conditions or qualifications?" He was quiet for a long time, wrench in hand, considering the question. "She apologizes when she hurts people's feelings. No, she apologizes when people are upset about something she did. That's different. She says, 'I'm sorry you feel that way,' or 'I'm sorry that happened,' but she never says, 'I was wrong and I'm sorry for my actions.' Maybe this time will be different, and maybe it won't. Are you willing to put Zoe through another confrontation based on maybe?" That Sunday, while Diane's pot roast went uneaten by two of her expected guests. Zoe and I spent the afternoon at the Arizona Science Center. We explored the interactive exhibits, watched a planetarium show about desert wildlife, and had lunch in the museum cafe surrounded by other families, who seemed genuinely happy to be spending time together. "Mama, why didn't we go to Grandma Diane's house today?" Zoe asked as we waited in line to see the physics demonstration. Daddy said she was making special dinner. I had been dreading this question, trying to figure out how to explain family dysfunction to an 8-year-old without poisoning her relationship with her grandmother or burdening her with adult problems. Sometimes grown-ups need time to work through their feelings before they can spend time together again, I said carefully. Grandma Diane and I had a disagreement about what happened at your ceremony, and we need to figure that out before we can have family dinners. Are you mad at her for stepping on my blazer? The directness of the question caught me off guard. I had assumed that Zoe, like most children, would absorb the family narrative that what happened was a misunderstanding or accident. But she had seen exactly what I had seen, and she was asking for confirmation that her perception was accurate. Yes, sweetheart, I'm upset that she destroyed something that was important to you, and I'm upset that she didn't apologize for doing it. Me too, Zoe said simply. It made me sad that she wasn't nice to my special outfit. That evening, Marcus returned from his parents' house looking like he had been through a war. He found me in our bedroom, folding laundry and trying to process the strange mixture of guilt and relief I felt about missing the family gathering. "How did it go?" I asked, though his expression had already answered the question. "She was hurt that you didn't come. She kept asking what she could do to fix things, but every time I tried to explain what you were upset about, she'd say that wasn't what happened." What did she say happened? According to her, she was trying to help Zoe be more comfortable. The blazer got damaged accidentally during a wardrobe change, and you overreacted because you were stressed about the ceremony. I sat down heavily on our bed, the folded towel in my hands forgotten. She's rewritten the entire incident. In her version, she's the helpful grandmother, I'm the stressed-out mother, and the blazer damaged itself. She showed everyone the Facebook photos from the ceremony, kept talking about what a beautiful day it was and how proud she was of Zoe. "Did you show anyone the video?" Marcus shook his head. "I couldn't. It felt like betraying family." There it was again. The video that showed exactly what happened was a betrayal, but lying about what happened was just family loyalty. I was beginning to understand that in the Rodriguez family system, truth was less important than maintaining the illusion of harmony. "She wants to take Zoe shopping next weekend," Marcus continued. "She thinks if she buys her a new outfit, it might help smooth things over." Absolutely not. Carmen, it's a gesture. She's trying to make amends. She's trying to buy forgiveness and teach Zoe that people can hurt you and then purchase your silence with gifts. That's not a lesson I want my daughter to learn. So what's your solution? Cut off contact with my parents forever because of one bad day? My solution is for your mother to acknowledge what she did, apologize sincerely, and commit to respecting boundaries in the future. Until that happens, I don't trust her around Zoe. That's never gonna happen, Carmen. You know Mom doesn't do big emotional scenes. Then I guess we have a problem. The next few days brought a careful dance of family politics that felt like navigating a minefield. Diane began reaching out to mutual friends and extended family members, sharing her version of events and positioning herself as the injured party trying to reconcile with an unreasonable daughter-in-law. My sister Lucia called me Wednesday evening, her voice careful and concerned. "Carmen, I just got off the phone with your mother-in-law. She's really upset about what happened at Zoe's ceremony. She said you recorded her without permission and threatened to post it online." "She told you I threatened to post it?" "She said you were waving your phone around and making threats about exposing her. She's worried you're having some kind of breakdown." I closed my eyes and counted to 10, reminding myself that Diane was a master manipulator who had decades of practice at controlling narratives. Of course she had gotten to Lucia first, framing the story to make me look unstable and vindictive. Lucia, she destroyed Zoe's blazer at the award ceremony. She threw it on the ground and stepped on it while Zoe cried. I recorded it because it was so outrageous that I knew no one would believe it happened. "Carmen, that doesn't sound like Diane. She loves Zoe. Are you sure you're not reading more into this than what actually happened?" And there it was. Even my own sister, who had witnessed years of Diane's controlling behavior at family gatherings, found it easier to believe that I was exaggerating than to accept that a grandmother would deliberately hurt her granddaughter to prove a point. "Do you want to see the video?" I asked. Lucia was quiet for a moment. "Maybe you should talk to someone, Carmen. This level of anger toward family isn't healthy." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone and realizing that Diane's strategy was working perfectly. She was systematically reaching out to everyone in our social circle, sharing a version of events that painted her as the victim, and me as an unstable woman looking for reasons to cause family drama. By the time anyone thought to ask for my side of the story, the narrative would already be set. I would be the daughter-in-law who couldn't let go of a minor incident, who was keeping a grandmother away from her beloved granddaughter over a simple misunderstanding. The Facebook messages started arriving Thursday morning. Casual acquaintances from church, neighbors, other parents from Zoe's school, all expressing concern about the family difficulties they had heard about and offering to pray for reconciliation and healing. Each message was phrased with careful neutrality, but the subtext was clear. I was being unreasonable. I was preventing forgiveness. I was damaging family relationships over something that could be easily resolved if I would just let it go. By Friday evening, I felt like I was drowning in other people's opinions about my family situation. Everyone seemed to have advice about forgiveness and moving forward, but no one wanted to hear about what had actually happened, or why I might be reluctant to expose my daughter to someone who had shown such callous disregard for her feelings. That's when Brianna called, her voice bright with false cheerfulness. "Carmen, I hope you're doing well. Mom asked me to reach out because she's really worried about this whole misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding would that be, Brianna?" "Oh, you know, the thing at Zoe's ceremony. Mom feels terrible that things got so blown out of proportion. She was just trying to help with Zoe's outfit, and somehow it all went sideways. She threw Zoe's blazer on the ground and stepped on it. Well, that's not exactly how she remembers it. She said there was some kind of accident with the clothing, and you got really upset and started recording her, which made everything worse." I realized that I was hearing the official family version of events, the story that had been carefully crafted to minimize Diane's actions while maximizing my overreaction. It was probably the same story that had been shared with Lucia and posted subtly on Facebook and told to anyone who would listen. "Brianna, were you watching when it happened?" "I was dealing with the boys, so I missed most of it. But Mom said, so you didn't actually see what happened, but you're comfortable telling me that my memory of it is wrong." "I'm not saying your memory is wrong. I'm just saying maybe there are different ways to interpret what happened. There's video, Brianna. There's no interpretation needed." "Right, the video. Mom's really hurt that you recorded her during a private family moment. She feels like you were looking for ammunition against her. A private family moment. As if destroying a child's clothing in a public parking lot was an intimate gathering that I had violated by documenting it. The only reason I recorded it was because what she was doing was so outrageous that I knew no one would believe it happened. And judging by these conversations, I was right. Carmen, you have to understand that Mom's been part of this family for 40 years. We all know she can be a little intense sometimes, but she's not malicious. She loves Zoe more than anything. People who love children don't deliberately destroy their special belongings to prove points about authority. Look, she wants to make this right. She's planning to buy Zoe a whole new outfit, something even nicer than the one that got damaged. She just wants a chance to show you that she cares. I don't want her money, Brianna. I want her accountability. What does that mean exactly? I want her to admit what she did, apologize sincerely, and commit to respecting my decisions as Zoe's mother in the future." Brianna was quiet for a long moment. "Carmen, you know that's never gonna happen. Mom doesn't do public apologies. It's just not who she is." Then I guess we know where everyone's priorities are. After Brianna hung up, I found myself thinking about that phrase, "It's just not who she is," as if personality traits were immutable forces of nature rather than choices people made about how to treat others. Diane didn't apologize because she had spent decades learning that she didn't have to. Every time she overstepped boundaries or hurt someone's feelings, the family rallied around her emotional comfort rather than addressing her behavior. Everyone had learned to adjust their expectations to accommodate her limitations rather than expecting her to grow or change. The breaking point came Saturday morning when I found Zoe sitting at our kitchen table, carefully coloring a picture she had drawn of herself accepting her award. In her artistic interpretation, she was wearing a beautiful, intact blazer and smiling widely. But in the margin of the paper, she had written in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, "I wish Grandma Diane liked my scientist outfit." My heart broke looking at that sentence. My daughter was internalizing the message that her choices weren't good enough, that her grandmother's approval was more important than her own confidence, that she needed to doubt her instincts about what made her feel proud and professional. "Zoe, sweetheart, can we talk about this picture?" I asked, sitting down beside her at the table. "I keep thinking about my ceremony," she said, not looking up from her coloring. "I was so excited about my blazer, but then Grandma Diane said it wasn't right." "Your blazer was perfect. It was exactly right for you and for the ceremony." "But she's a grown-up. Maybe she knows better than me about what looks good." The resignation in her voice was devastating. At 8 years old, Zoe was already learning to dismiss her own judgment in favor of an adult who had demonstrated poor judgment. She was absorbing lessons about deference and self-doubt that would take years to unlearn. "Zoe, being a grown-up doesn't make someone automatically right about everything. Grown-ups make mistakes too, and sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people's feelings." "Did Grandma Diane make a mistake when she stepped on my blazer?" The question was asked with the devastating honesty that only children possess. She wasn't looking for a complex explanation about family dynamics or personality conflicts. She wanted to know if what happened to her was wrong. "Yes, baby, that was a mistake. And it was a mistake that hurt your feelings, which makes it a bigger mistake." "Will she say sorry?" I looked at my daughter's hopeful face and realized I was at a crossroads. I could give her false hope about her grandmother's character, could teach her to lower her expectations to match Diane's limitations, could help her learn the family pattern of making excuses for unacceptable behavior. Or I could tell her the truth and help her develop realistic expectations about how people should treat her. "I don't know if she will, sweetheart, but I want you to know that you deserve apologies when people hurt you. And you don't have to pretend everything is okay when it isn't." That afternoon, while Zoe was at her friend's house working on a group project, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I opened my laptop and began typing a Facebook post that would change everything. Yesterday, my 8-year-old daughter won first place in the regional science competition. It should have been one of the proudest days of her young life. Instead, it became a lesson in family dysfunction when my mother-in-law deliberately destroyed the special outfit my daughter had chosen for the ceremony because she disagreed with my parenting choices. I attached the video to the post, my hands shaking as I typed the caption that would accompany it. "I'm sharing this not for drama or revenge, but because my daughter is watching how the adults in her life handle conflict. I can teach her that people who love you sometimes hurt you, and you should accept it for the sake of family peace. Or I can teach her that her feelings matter, her choices deserve respect, and she doesn't have to tolerate cruel behavior from anyone, even family members." I stared at the draft for 20 minutes, my finger hovering over the publish button. Once I posted this, there would be no going back. The family facade would be shattered, relationships would be permanently altered, and I would be branded as the daughter-in-law who aired dirty laundry in public. But I thought about Zoe's picture, about her careful handwriting expressing the wish that her grandmother had liked her scientist outfit. I thought about all the future family gatherings where my daughter would learn to shrink herself to accommodate someone else's need for control. I pushed publish. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, the post had been shared dozens of times and had accumulated hundreds of comments. Most were supportive, with other parents sharing their own stories of family members who had crossed boundaries and facing similar struggles with toxic relatives. But there were also comments defending Diane, people who knew her from church or social circles, expressing shock that anyone would paint such a loving grandmother in such a negative light. Several people suggested that I was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding, that family disagreements should be handled privately. The video itself was undeniable, though. Watching Diane deliberately throw the blazer on the ground and step on it while Zoe cried, made it impossible to frame the incident as an accident or misunderstanding. The comments gradually shifted as more people watched the footage and realized that this wasn't a case of conflicting perspectives, but documented evidence of deliberate cruelty. Marcus arrived home from his Saturday golf game to find me monitoring the Facebook responses on my laptop, the post now approaching 1,000 shares and climbing rapidly. "Carmen, what did you do?" he asked, his face pale as he scrolled through the comments and shares. I told the truth. "You put a private family matter on the internet for everyone to see." I documented unacceptable behavior toward our daughter. The fact that it's embarrassing for your family doesn't make it private. Marcus collapsed into the chair across from me, his golf clothes wrinkled and his face stricken. My phone's been ringing non-stop. Mom's beside herself. Dad doesn't know what to do. Brianna's getting messages from people she hasn't talked to in years. Good. Maybe now people will stop pressuring me to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. You've humiliated my mother in front of the entire community. Your mother humiliated herself. I just made sure there was evidence of it. The doorbell rang before Marcus could respond, and we both knew without looking who it would be. Diane's car was visible through our front window, parked at an aggressive angle in our driveway, like she had been in too much of a hurry to straighten it. I opened the door to find Diane standing on our porch, with tears streaming down her face, her usually perfect makeup smeared, and her hands shaking with what looked like genuine distress. "How could you do this to me?" she asked, her voice breaking on the words. "How could you destroy my reputation over a simple misunderstanding?" I posted a video of what actually happened. If that destroys your reputation, maybe you should consider why. Take it down, right now. Delete the post, and we can work through this as a family. I'm not deleting anything. Diane's tears stopped, as if they had been turned off with a switch, and her face hardened into an expression I had never seen before. Gone was the carefully maintained facade of the loving grandmother and concerned family member. What remained was something cold and calculating. "If you don't delete that post, you'll regret it," she said, her voice low and threatening. "Is that supposed to scare me? I have friends, Carmen. People in this community who respect me and trust my judgment. I can make things very difficult for you and your family if you choose to continue this destructive path." The mask had finally slipped completely. No more pretense about family harmony or misunderstandings or wanting what was best for Zoe. This was about power and control and punishment for anyone who dared to challenge her authority. "Are you threatening me, Diane?" "I'm explaining consequences. Actions have consequences. And your actions today will have very serious consequences for your family's place in this community." Marcus appeared behind me, drawn by the increasingly hostile tone of our conversation. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm trying to save this family from your wife's vindictive destruction," Diane replied, not taking her eyes off me. "She's posted a video online designed to humiliate me, and if she doesn't remove it immediately, she'll discover exactly how much influence I have in this community." "Mom, you can't threaten Carmen." "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply pointing out that people who attack family members publicly tend to find themselves isolated and unwelcome in decent society." I felt something shift inside me, a final piece of understanding clicking into place. This wasn't just about the blazer, or the ceremony, or even the pattern of controlling behavior. This was about a woman who had built her entire identity around being respected and admired in her community, and who was willing to destroy anyone who threatened that carefully constructed image. Your reputation isn't my responsibility, Diane. If the truth about your behavior damages how people see you, that's something you need to address with yourself, not with me. The truth? Diane laughed, but it was a bitter sound with no humor in it. The truth is that you're an ungrateful daughter-in-law who has never appreciated everything I've done for this family. The truth is that you're jealous of my relationship with Zoe and looking for excuses to drive a wedge between us. The truth is on video for everyone to see. Videos can be edited. Context can be manipulated. People who know me will understand that you've taken a moment of family stress and twisted it into something ugly for your own purposes. Even faced with undeniable evidence of her actions, Diane was still attempting to control the narrative. She was suggesting that the video itself was somehow fraudulent, that my documentation of her behavior was actually an attack on her character rather than protection of my daughter. "Mom, just stop," Marcus said, his voice tired and defeated. "Please just stop." "Don't you dare take her side against me," Diane snapped, turning her anger toward her son. "I have sacrificed everything for this family, and this is how you repay me? By letting your wife humiliate me in public?" "You humiliated yourself, Mom. I watched the video. We all did. What you did to Zoe was wrong." For a moment, Diane looked genuinely shocked. In 40 years of marriage and motherhood, she had probably never had her own son directly contradict her behavior without offering immediate forgiveness or making excuses for her actions. "I was trying to help her look appropriate," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. She looked ridiculous in that blazer. She looked professional and confident, which is exactly how an award-winning scientist should look, Marcus replied. "And even if you disagreed with her outfit choice, destroying it while she cried was unacceptable. It was an accident. Mom, it's on video. Everyone can see that it wasn't an accident." Diane stood on our porch for a long moment, seeming to realize that her usual strategies weren't working. The tears had failed to generate sympathy, the threats had failed to generate compliance, and even her own son was refusing to enable her behavior. "Fine," she said finally, her voice flat and cold. "If this is how you want to handle family disagreements, then this is how we'll handle them. But don't expect me to forget this betrayal." She turned and walked back to her car without another word, leaving Marcus and me standing in our doorway, watching her drive away with the same aggressive speed she had arrived with. "That went better than expected," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "Better? Carmen? She just threatened to make our lives miserable." "She's been making our lives miserable for years. The only difference is that now she's doing it openly, instead of hiding it behind fake smiles and passive-aggressive comments." That evening, after Zoe had returned from her friend's house and we had carefully explained that there might be some family tension for a while but that none of it was her fault, I checked the Facebook post one more time before bed. It had been shared over 3,000 times and had accumulated nearly 500 comments. Many were from people sharing their own stories of toxic family members, others were offering support and encouragement, and a few were still defending Diane or criticizing me for airing family business publicly. But buried in the comments was a message from someone I didn't recognize. A woman named Patricia Hernandez, who identified herself as a former coworker of Diane's from 20 years ago. "I'm not surprised by this video. Diane exhibited similar controlling and vindictive behavior in our workplace for years. She made life miserable for anyone who didn't defer to her authority, and she was particularly cruel to younger women who she saw as threats to her position. She eventually resigned after HR received multiple complaints about her treatment of subordinates, but she managed to frame it as a voluntary career change rather than forced resignation. I've always wondered if she continued this pattern in her personal relationships." The message was a revelation. Diane's behavior wasn't limited to family dynamics or triggered by stress about her granddaughter. This was a long-standing pattern of using emotional manipulation and social pressure to control people around her. The fact that she had been forced to leave a job because of similar behavior suggested that this wasn't just a family problem but a character problem. I screenshot the message and sent it to Marcus, who was in the bathroom getting ready for bed. He read it in silence, then sat heavily on the edge of our bed. "I never knew about any workplace problems," he said quietly. "She always said she left that job to focus on family." Of course she did, just like she's been rewriting the story of what happened at Zoe's ceremony. People like your mother don't admit to being forced out of situations. They create face-saving narratives that make them look like the victim or the hero. What if there are other people out there with similar stories? What if this pattern goes back decades? Then maybe sharing that video was exactly the right thing to do. Maybe other people needed to see that they weren't crazy for thinking her behavior was unacceptable. Over the next few days, the comments and private messages continued to arrive. Former neighbors describing incidents at homeowners association meetings where Diane had tried to have families fined for minor violations after personal disputes. Church members sharing stories about her treatment of volunteers who didn't follow her detailed instructions exactly, parents from Zoe's school mentioning uncomfortable interactions at PTA meetings where Diane had questioned their fundraising choices or event planning decisions. A pattern emerged of a woman who needed to be in control of every situation and who became vindictive when that control was challenged. The blazer incident wasn't an isolated moment of poor judgment triggered by family stress. It was the latest example of behavior that had been consistent for decades. But perhaps the most telling response came from someone much closer to home. Late Wednesday evening, I received a private message from Marcus's cousin Elena, Diane's niece, who lived in California and only saw the family during major holidays. "Carmen, thank you for posting that video. I've been watching my aunt treat family members badly for 30 years, and no one ever called her out on it because that's just how Diane is. When I was 12, she deliberately broke a ceramic horse I had made in art class because she said it was taking up too much space on my grandmother's mantel. When I cried, she told me I was being dramatic and that the horse was ugly anyway. My parents made me apologize to her for causing a scene. I'm 42 years old and I still remember how worthless she made me feel that day. Watching her do the same thing to Zoe brought it all back." The message continued for several paragraphs, detailing incident after incident of Diane's cruel treatment of children and adults who didn't comply with her expectations. Elena described family gatherings, where people walked on eggshells to avoid triggering Diane's displeasure, holidays ruined by her criticism and control, and a family culture built around managing her emotions rather than addressing her behavior. "The worst part," Elena wrote, "is that she's so good at making it seem like she's the victim. Whenever someone finally stands up to her, she turns on the tears and the whole family rallies around her because she's so upset. Meanwhile, the person she actually hurt gets pressured to apologize for defending themselves. You're the first person I've ever seen refuse to play that game." Reading Elena's message, I realized that my decision to post the video had done more than just document one incident of poor behavior. It had given voice to decades of people who had been hurt by Diane's actions, but pressured into silence by family dynamics and social expectations. Thursday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was working in my home office when the doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Mrs. Henderson, Zoe's teacher, standing on our porch with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to talk to you about Zoe." My heart immediately went to the worst-case scenario. "Is everything okay? Did something happen at school?" "She's fine academically, but I've noticed some changes in her behavior since the award ceremony. She's been much quieter than usual, and yesterday she asked me if her science project was really good enough to win first place." The revelation hit me like a punch to the stomach. Diane's destruction of the blazer hadn't just ruined one outfit or one ceremony. It had planted seeds of self-doubt in my daughter's mind about her academic achievements and her own judgment. "She's been having some family stress," I said carefully, not sure how much to share with Zoe's teacher. "I saw the video you posted on Facebook," Mrs. Henderson said gently. "Several of us teachers have been talking about it. We've all had interactions with your mother-in-law over the years, and frankly, many of us have been concerned about her treatment of students and families." "What do you mean?" "She's volunteered for several school events, and she has a tendency to take over and criticize other people's contributions. Last year during the science fair setup, she made one of the third-grade students cry by telling him his display board was sloppy and unprofessional. When his mother complained, your mother-in-law said she was just trying to help him learn proper standards. Another pattern, another example of Diane's need to control and criticize extending beyond family relationships. She was treating children at my daughter's school the same way she had treated Zoe at the ceremony, using her adult authority to tear down their confidence and impose her standards on their work. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know that Zoe won't be accompanied by her grandmother to any future school events. If there are any issues with that decision, or if my mother-in-law tries to insert herself into school activities, please contact me immediately. I think that's very wise, Mrs. Rodriguez. And I want you to know that what you did by sharing that video was brave. Too many children suffer in silence when adults abuse their authority, and too many families enable that abuse to keep peace. Zoe is lucky to have a mother who stands up for her." That afternoon, I had a long conversation with Zoe about confidence, self-worth, and trusting her own instincts. I reminded her that her science project had been judged by experts who knew nothing about family drama or clothing choices, that her award was based purely on the quality of her research and presentation. Sometimes people try to make us doubt ourselves when they're feeling bad about their own choices, I told her. But your achievements belong to you, and nobody can take them away by saying mean things or acting badly. Will Grandma Diane ever say sorry for stepping on my blazer? The question I had been dreading, the one that would force me to either give false hope or shatter illusions about family love and loyalty. I don't know, sweetheart. Some people have trouble admitting when they've made mistakes, even when those mistakes hurt people they love. But if she loved me, wouldn't she want to say sorry so I wouldn't feel sad anymore? Out of the mouths of babes. An 8-year-old had identified the fundamental contradiction in Diane's behavior that adults had been making excuses for over decades. If she truly loved Zoe, her granddaughter's emotional well-being would be more important than her own pride. You're absolutely right, Zoe. People who love us should care about our feelings and want to make things right when they hurt us. So maybe she doesn't really love me the way I thought she did. The matter-of-fact way Zoe said it broke my heart and filled me with pride simultaneously. She was learning to trust her own perceptions instead of accepting adult gaslighting, developing realistic expectations about how people should treat her, understanding that love without accountability isn't really love at all. Friday evening brought another development that I hadn't anticipated. Marcus came home from work looking thoughtful rather than stressed, which had been his default expression all week. I had lunch with Dad today, he said, settling into his favorite chair with unusual calm. We talked about everything that's happened, about the video, about Mom's reaction to it. How's he handling all this? Better than I expected, actually. He said he's been watching Mom's behavior for years and feeling helpless to address it because she always has explanations that make him feel like he's being unreasonable for being concerned. This was the first indication that Robert might be capable of seeing his wife's actions clearly, rather than through the filter of marital loyalty that had obscured his vision for 4 decades. Did he see the video? He watched it 3 times. He said he couldn't believe what he was seeing, that he knew Mom could be difficult, but he never imagined she would deliberately hurt Zoe like that. What did he say about her threats to make our lives difficult? Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. He said he's tired of making excuses for her behavior and watching people get hurt because nobody wants to confront her about it. He's been sleeping in the guest room since Sunday because he can't stand listening to her complain about how unfairly she's being treated. The idea of Robert finally reaching his limit after decades of enabling was almost impossible to believe, but his absence from Diane's campaign to control the narrative had been notable all week. He wants to apologize to you in person, Marcus continued. He said he should have spoken up years ago when he noticed her treatment of you and other family members, but he kept telling himself it wasn't his place to interfere in her relationships. It wasn't his place to interfere, but it was his place to enable. That's exactly what he said. He used the word enable and talked about how he's been part of the problem by staying silent when she hurt people. Saturday morning brought the conversation I had been both dreading and anticipating all week. Robert appeared at our door without Diane, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. "Carmen, I owe you an apology," he said before I could even invite him inside. "I watched what my wife did to Zoe, and I did nothing to stop it. I've been watching her hurt people for years, and telling myself it wasn't my business to get involved. Come in, Robert. Let's talk." We sat in my living room, this man who had been my father-in-law for 10 years, but who I realized I barely knew as an individual separate from his wife's overwhelming personality. "I've been married to Diane for 42 years, he said, his hands folded carefully in his lap. Early on, I noticed that she had strong opinions about how things should be done, but I thought that was just confidence. I admired it, actually." "When did you start to realize it was more than confidence?" "Probably when Marcus was in high school and she had a conflict with one of his teachers about a grade she thought was unfair. She went to the principal, then the school board, then tried to get the teacher fired. The teacher hadn't done anything wrong except assign a grade that Diane disagreed with." "Did you try to stop her?" "I suggested that maybe she was overreacting, and she didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. After that, I learned to stay out of her conflicts with other people. The pattern was becoming clear. Diane had trained everyone around her, including her own husband, to avoid confronting her behavior by punishing anyone who questioned her with silent treatment, emotional manipulation, or escalated conflict. Robert, what she did to Zoe wasn't a conflict with another adult. She deliberately destroyed something that was important to a child, and she did it to punish me for disagreeing with her. I know. And I should have stopped her right then, should have demanded that she apologize, and replace the blazer immediately. Instead, I stood there like a coward and let her traumatize my granddaughter. The self-awareness in his voice was startling. For the first time since I had known him, Robert was speaking as an individual with his own moral compass, rather than as Diane's husband and enabler. What's changed? Why are you speaking up now? Because I watched that video and saw myself standing in the background doing nothing while my wife abused a child. I saw the look on Zoe's face when Diane stepped on her blazer, and I realized that my silence makes me complicit in every cruel thing Diane has done over the years. Where is Diane now? At her sister's house in Tucson. She's been there since Wednesday, calling everyone we know to complain about being victimized by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. I told her this morning that she needs to come home and apologize to you and Zoe, or I'll be filing for separation. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of 4 decades of marriage and the possibility of its ending. Robert, you don't have to blow up your marriage because of what happened to us. Carmen, this isn't just about what happened to you. This is about who I want to be for the rest of my life. Do I want to be the man who enables his wife's cruelty because it's easier than confronting her? Or do I want to be the man who stands up for what's right even when it's difficult? What did she say when you gave her that ultimatum? She said I was choosing you over her, that I was being manipulated by your lies and drama. She said that if I can't support my own wife against outsiders, then maybe we don't have a marriage worth saving. And what do you think about that? Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring out our front window at the desert landscape that stretched toward the mountains in the distance. I think that if she would rather end our marriage than apologize for hurting her granddaughter, then she's already made her choice about what matters most to her. The conversation continued for another hour, with Robert sharing stories about years of incidents that he had minimized or ignored, patterns of behavior that he had explained away rather than addressing directly. He talked about family members who had stopped visiting, friends who had gradually distanced themselves, neighbors who had learned to avoid Diane after unpleasant encounters. I used to think people just didn't understand her, he said. I thought they were being oversensitive or looking for reasons to dislike her. But watching that video, seeing how calculated and deliberate her actions were, I finally understood that the problem was never with other people. When he left, Robert hugged me for the first time in 10 years of family gatherings, and I could see tears in his eyes as he said goodbye. Thank you for not letting this get swept under the rug, he said. Zoe deserves better, and so do you. That evening, as Marcus and I were putting Zoe to bed, she surprised us with a question that showed how much she had been processing the adult conversations and tensions of the past week. Mama, if Grandpa Robert is sorry about what happened and Grandma Diane isn't, what does that mean about love? I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. This was a crucial moment in her understanding of relationships and accountability. It means that people show love in different ways, sweetheart. People who really love us want to make things right when they hurt us, even if it's hard for them to admit they made mistakes. So Grandpa Robert loves me because he said sorry? Grandpa Robert loves you because he cares more about your feelings than he does about protecting himself from uncomfortable conversations. And Grandma Diane? I looked at my daughter's earnest face, this brilliant 8-year-old who was trying to make sense of adult complexity and family dysfunction. Grandma Diane has trouble putting other people's feelings before her own. That doesn't mean she doesn't love you, but it means her way of showing love isn't always healthy or kind. Zoe nodded thoughtfully, and I could see her processing this information about the difference between conditional and unconditional love, between people who take accountability for their actions and people who expect others to absorb the consequences of their behavior. I think I understand, she said finally. Some people love you the way you need to be loved, And some people love you the way they want to love you. The wisdom in her statement took my breath away. At 8 years old, she had identified the fundamental difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships, between love that serves the loved one and love that serves the lover. As I tucked her in and turned off her light, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for weeks. The video had caused family drama and social upheaval, but it had also given my daughter the tools to understand that she deserved better treatment than what she had received from her grandmother. The consequences of Diane's actions were finally catching up to her, and the people who had enabled her behavior for decades were beginning to step away from their roles as supporting cast members in her drama. But I had a feeling that the most challenging part of this story was still to come. Sunday morning arrived with an unusual quiet in our house. No rushed preparations for family gatherings, no anxiety about managing Diane's expectations or navigating family politics, no careful planning of conversations to avoid triggering conflicts. For the first time in years, we had a peaceful weekend morning that belonged entirely to us. Zoe was in the living room building an elaborate structure with her building blocks, explaining to her stuffed animals about architectural engineering principles she had learned from educational videos. Marcus was making pancakes while reading news articles on his phone, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, responding to the flood of messages that had continued arriving throughout the week. The support from strangers had been overwhelming and affirming, but it was the private messages from people who knew Diane personally that had been most revealing. Former coworkers, neighbors, church members, and distant relatives had all shared similar stories about her pattern of controlling behavior and vindictive responses to anyone who challenged her authority. One message particularly caught my attention. It was from a woman named Sarah Collins, who had been Diane's neighbor 15 years ago, before Marcus and I were married. I lived next door to Diane for 3 years, and she made our lives miserable over property line disputes that existed only in her mind. She called the city inspector 6 times, claiming we were violating setback requirements, filed noise complaints when our children played in our own backyard, and eventually tried to get our homeowners association to fine us for maintaining an unsightly property because we had a vegetable garden she didn't like. The message continued with details about legal battles, harassment campaigns, and social ostracism that Diane had orchestrated against anyone who refused to comply with her demands about neighborhood standards. The final straw was when she called Child Protective Services and claimed we were neglecting our children because they played outside without constant adult supervision. The investigation was closed immediately when the social worker realized there was no basis for the complaint, but the trauma to our family was devastating. We sold our house and moved across town just to get away from her. Reading Sarah's story, I realized that the blazer incident wasn't just part of a pattern of family dysfunction. It was part of a much larger pattern of using whatever authority or influence Diane possessed to punish people who didn't submit to her control. She had spent decades weaponizing social services, legal systems, and community organizations against anyone who crossed her. I screenshot the message and sent it to Marcus, who read it in silence while flipping pancakes with mechanical precision. "I never knew about any of this," he said finally. "She always said the neighbors were difficult people who caused problems for everyone on the street. Of course she did. Just like she's saying, I'm a vindictive daughter-in-law who's trying to destroy family harmony. The story always makes her the victim and everyone else the problem. How many people has she done this to over the years? Based on the messages I'm getting, dozens, maybe hundreds. She's been doing this her entire adult life, and people have just accepted it because nobody wanted to deal with the consequences of confronting her." Marcus turned off the stove and sat down across from me, his face showing the exhaustion of someone whose entire understanding of his family had been dismantled in the span of a week. What kind of person calls Child Protective Services on neighbors out of spite? The same kind of person who destroys an 8-year-old's clothing to prove a point about authority. That afternoon, I received a phone call that changed everything. The number was unfamiliar, but when I answered, the voice belonged to Tyler Brooks, the paralegal who had reached out to me after seeing the original Facebook post. "Carmen, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I've been following the response to your video, and I think you need to know about some legal developments." "What kind of developments?" your mother-in-law has retained an attorney. She's threatening to file defamation and harassment lawsuits against you for posting that video without her consent. The news hit me like ice water. Despite everything that had happened, I hadn't considered that Diane might try to use the legal system to silence me or punish me for documenting her behavior. Can she do that? The video shows exactly what happened. Truth is a defense against defamation, and you were recording in a public place, so she doesn't have a reasonable expectation of privacy, but she can still file frivolous lawsuits that would cost you time and money to defend, even if she ultimately loses. What should I do? First, don't take the post down. That would look like an admission of wrongdoing. Second, start documenting everything. If she's threatening legal action over this video, she's probably going to escalate her retaliation in other ways. Tyler's prediction proved accurate within hours. That evening, I received a certified letter from Diane's attorney demanding that I remove the Facebook post, issue a public apology for malicious defamation of character, and pay damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. The letter was clearly designed to intimidate rather than inform, full of legal language that made my documentation of actual events sound like a criminal conspiracy. But reading between the lines, I could see that Diane's attorney was trying to create a paper trail that would support her narrative of being victimized by a vindictive daughter-in-law. Marcus read the letter with growing anger, his face flushing as he absorbed the implications of his mother's legal threats. She's actually going to try to sue you for posting a video of what she did to Zoe. She's trying to scare me into silence. This is how she's always handled people who refuse to accept her version of reality. What are we going to do? We're going to document everything, just like Tyler suggested. And we're going to find out exactly how many other people Diane has threatened with legal action over the years. The next morning, I called Tyler Brooks and arranged to meet with him at his law office in downtown Phoenix. The building was modest but professional, and Tyler himself was younger than I had expected, probably in his early 30s, with an earnest manner that inspired confidence. "I have been researching your mother-in-law since we talked yesterday," he said, settling behind his desk with a thick folder. "She's been involved in quite a few legal disputes over the years." "What kind of disputes?" "Neighborhood conflicts, workplace harassment complaints, disputes with contractors and service providers, several small claims court cases. She seems to have a pattern of threatening legal action whenever someone doesn't comply with her demands." Tyler opened the folder and spread out several documents, copies of court filings and legal correspondence that painted a picture of someone who used the legal system as a weapon of intimidation. Most of these cases were either dismissed or settled out of court, usually because the other party couldn't afford to fight her. She seems to understand that the threat of legal action is often more effective than actual litigation. So she's done this before, many times. And based on the pattern, I don't think she actually intends to follow through with a lawsuit against you. This is psychological warfare designed to make you back down. What happens if I don't back down? Then she either has to file an actual lawsuit, which would be expensive and difficult to win given the evidence, or she has to find other ways to retaliate. Tyler leaned back in his chair, studying my face with professional assessment. "Carmen, I need to ask you something directly. Are you prepared for this to get worse before it gets better?" "What do you mean?" "People like your mother-in-law don't stop when their first intimidation tactic fails. If threatening you with legal action doesn't work, she'll try other approaches. Financial pressure, social isolation, targeting your family through other institutions. She's going to escalate until you either submit or she faces real consequences." The conversation was sobering, but it also crystallized something important for me. This wasn't just about the blazer incident or even about standing up for Zoe. This was about stopping a pattern of behavior that had been devastating people for decades. "Tyler, what would it take to make her face real consequences?" "That depends on what she does next. If she files false police reports, makes fraudulent complaints to government agencies, or harasses you through third parties, those could be criminal violations. If she defames you to employers or tries to interfere with your business relationships, that could be civil liability. So I need to wait for her to commit actual crimes before anything can be done? You need to document everything she does and be prepared to respond strategically rather than reactively." That afternoon, I started putting Tyler's advice into practice. I created a detailed timeline of every interaction I had with Diane over the past 10 years, noting patterns of controlling behavior, instances of boundary violations, and examples of retaliation when her authority was challenged. The exercise was eye-opening. Written down in chronological order, Diane's behavior looked even more disturbing than it had felt in real time. There were dozens of incidents that I had minimized or forgotten, times when she had deliberately undermined my parenting decisions, social choices, or household management in ways that seemed petty individually but formed a clear pattern of systematic domination. The Christmas present rewrapping wasn't about making things look better. It was about demonstrating that my efforts weren't adequate and that she had the authority to redo my work. The birthday party decoration changes weren't about aesthetics. They were about showing guests that she was in charge of family events, not me. Every helpful suggestion about Zoe's clothing, activities, or behavior had been designed to establish that Diane's judgment was superior to mine as Zoe's mother. Every criticism disguised as concern had been calculated to erode my confidence and make me second-guess my own instincts. Looking at the pattern laid out on paper, I realized that the blazer incident had been inevitable. Years of smaller power struggles had been building toward a moment when Diane would have to choose between accepting my authority as Zoe's mother or escalating to overt aggression. She had chosen escalation. Wednesday evening brought news that confirmed Tyler's predictions about retaliation. Marcus came home from work, looking grim, carrying printouts of emails that had been forwarded to him by his supervisor. "Mom sent emails to my boss and the HR department," he said, handing me the papers with shaking hands. "She told them I was having family problems that were affecting my work performance, and suggested they might want to monitor my stress levels." I read the emails with growing disbelief. Diane had contacted Marcus's employer to share her concerns about his unstable home environment and the vindictive behavior of his wife that was causing him emotional distress. She had positioned herself as a concerned mother, worried about her son's well-being, while subtly suggesting that I was a problem that needed professional intervention. "How did your boss respond?" He called me into his office and asked if everything was okay at home. I had to explain the whole situation, show him the video, and convince him that Mom was retaliating rather than genuinely concerned about my work performance. What did he say? He said it was highly inappropriate for a family member to contact someone's employer about personal matters, and he's documenting everything in case she tries to cause more problems. This was exactly the kind of escalation Tyler had warned me about. When legal threats failed to achieve the desired compliance, Diane had moved to attacking Marcus's livelihood, trying to create professional consequences for our refusal to submit to her authority. "Marcus, you need to understand that this is just the beginning. She's going to keep escalating until we either give in or stop her completely." How do we stop someone who's willing to lie to employers and threaten lawsuits over a family disagreement? We document everything, we don't respond emotionally, and we wait for her to do something that actually violates the law. Thursday morning brought another escalation that was both predictable and infuriating. I received a call from Zoe's school principal, Mrs. Anderson, asking me to come in for a meeting about some concerns that have been raised about our family situation. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come in this afternoon?" The meeting was as uncomfortable as I had expected. Mrs. Anderson sat behind her desk with a carefully neutral expression, while explaining that she had received a phone call from Diane expressing concerns about Zoe's emotional well-being and my erratic behavior following the award ceremony. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I want to be clear that we have no concerns about Zoe's welfare or your parenting. She's a happy, well-adjusted child who clearly feels loved and supported at home. But when we receive calls from family members expressing concerns, we have to follow up." "What exactly did my mother-in-law tell you?" "She said that you've been posting inappropriate content about family members on social media, that you've been keeping Zoe away from her grandparents without justification, and that she's worried about the impact of family conflict on Zoe's academic performance." I felt my jaw clench. Diane was systematically contacting every institution connected to our family, trying to create a paper trail of concerns about my fitness as a mother and my mental stability. "Mrs. Anderson, would you like to see the video that I posted?" "I've already seen it. Several staff members shared it with me when it started circulating." What your mother-in-law did to Zoe's outfit was completely unacceptable. Then you understand why I'm not comfortable having her around my daughter right now. Absolutely. And I want you to know that we'll be documenting this conversation and Mrs. Rodriguez Sr.'s phone call. If she contacts the school again about your family, we'll refer her to our district's policy on harassment. The conversation was reassuring in terms of the school's support, but deeply concerning in terms of what it revealed about Diane's strategy. She was trying to build a case that I was an unfit mother whose behavior was putting Zoe at risk, creating documentation that could potentially be used in custody proceedings or child welfare investigations. That evening, I called Tyler Brooks and updated him on the employment and school contacts. "She's building towards something bigger," he said after I finished explaining the week's events. "Contacting employers and schools isn't random harassment. She's trying to establish a pattern of concerns about your stability and parenting that she can use later." Use for what? Possibly grandparents, rights litigation? Arizona has laws that allow grandparents to petition for visitation rights in certain circumstances, including when they can demonstrate that denial of contact is harmful to the child's well-being. She's going to try to get court-ordered visitation with Zoe? It's possible she'd have to prove that she has an established relationship with Zoe, and that your decision to limit contact is not in Zoe's best interests. The employment and school contacts could be part of building a case that you're emotionally unstable and making decisions based on vindictiveness rather than legitimate concerns. What can I do to protect against that? Keep documenting everything. Get statements from school personnel about her inappropriate contact. Ask your husband's employer to provide written documentation of her interference. And most importantly, make sure that your reasons for limiting her contact with Zoe are clearly documented and based on her behavior towards Zoe, not your feelings about her behavior toward you. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected ally. Natasha Kim, my best friend since college, called with information that I hadn't expected. "Carmen, I've been following the whole Facebook situation, and I remembered something that might be important. Do you remember when Diane volunteered at the Children's Museum fundraiser 3 years ago?" I did remember. Diane had insisted on chairing the silent auction committee despite having no previous experience with fundraising events, and there had been complaints about her management style. What about it? I was volunteering too, remember? And I witnessed her interaction with that little boy whose mother had donated a handmade quilt for the auction. The memory came flooding back. A 6-year-old boy had been excited to see his mother's quilt displayed prominently, but Diane had moved it to a less visible location because she thought the colors clashed with her table arrangements. She told him that pretty things needed to be in the right place to look their best, and his mother's quilt would look better somewhere less noticeable. Natasha continued. When he started to cry, she told him he was being a baby about something that didn't matter. "Why are you bringing this up now?" "Because I just realized it's the exact same pattern as what she did to Zoe. She has a history of hurting children's feelings to maintain control over events and situations." "Would you be willing to write down what you witnessed?" "I already did. I'm emailing you a detailed account of everything I saw and heard that day. If this goes to court, you'll have evidence that her treatment of Zoe wasn't an isolated incident." Saturday morning brought the phone call I had been expecting all week. Diane's voice was crisp and businesslike when I answered, stripped of the emotional manipulation she had used in previous conversations. "Carmen, I think we need to have a frank discussion about this situation before it gets any more out of hand." "I'm listening. You've made your point. You've humiliated me publicly and caused significant damage to my reputation and relationships. I think that's enough revenge for whatever grievances you imagine you have." The framing was perfect, Diane. I had imagined grievances and sought revenge, rather than documenting actual behavior and protecting my daughter. Even in her attempt at negotiation, she couldn't acknowledge that her actions had been wrong. "This isn't about revenge, Diane. This is about protecting Zoe from someone who has shown a willingness to hurt her, to prove points about authority." "I would never hurt Zoe. Everything I do is out of love for my granddaughter. You destroyed her special outfit while she cried, and then told her she was being dramatic for being upset about it. That was a moment of frustration during a stressful situation. You're acting like I committed some kind of crime against a child. You did commit a crime against a child. You deliberately destroyed her property to punish me for disagreeing with you. Fine. If that's how you want to characterize it, then let's talk about solutions. What do you want from me? The question caught me off guard. After weeks of threats, legal intimidation, and retaliation, Diane was suddenly ready to negotiate, but her tone suggested this was strategy rather than genuine remorse. I want you to apologize to Zoe for what you did. Not for the blazer getting damaged, but for your actions that damaged it. I want you to acknowledge that your behavior was wrong and commit to respecting my decisions as her mother. And then what? We pretend this whole public humiliation never happened? Then we see if you can actually follow through on respecting boundaries. Carmen, you're asking me to admit to child abuse in front of my granddaughter. That's not a reasonable request. I'm asking you to take responsibility for your actions and apologize for hurting someone you claim to love. I'm not going to confess to crimes I didn't commit to satisfy your need for vindication. Then I guess we don't have anything to discuss. Actually, we do. Because I've decided that if you're not willing to be reasonable, I'll have to pursue other options. What other options? Legal options, grandparents, rights. Documentation of your refusal to allow a loving grandmother to maintain a relationship with her granddaughter. There it was. Tyler had been right about her building toward legal action, but not the kind he had initially expected. She wasn't going to sue me for defamation. She was going to sue for court-ordered access to Zoe. Diane, any court that sees the video of you destroying Zoe's clothing is going to have serious questions about your definition of love. Any court that sees documentation of your vindictive social media posts and your refusal to allow mediation or family counseling is going to have serious questions about your motives. The conversation ended with mutual threats and no resolution, but it had clarified Diane's strategy. She was going to frame my protection of Zoe as vindictive interference with grandparent-grandchild relationships, positioning herself as the injured party, seeking legal remedy for my unreasonable behavior. Sunday evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, composing an email to Tyler Brooks that would set in motion the final phase of this conflict. The email detailed every conversation, threat, and retaliation attempt from the past week, along with my growing certainty that Diane was planning legal action that would force us into court. Tyler, I think we need to stop being reactive and start being proactive. If she's going to take this to court, I want to be ready with everything we need to demonstrate the pattern of her behavior and the legitimacy of my concerns about Zoe's safety. His response came within an hour, despite it being Sunday evening. Carmen, I agree completely. It's time to gather formal statements from everyone who has witnessed her behavior, collect all the documentary evidence of her retaliation attempts, and prepare for what's likely to be a very ugly legal battle. What are our chances? Based on what I've seen so far, very good. She's made several strategic errors that have actually strengthened your position. The employer contact, the school interference, and the legal threats all demonstrate exactly the kind of vindictive and controlling behavior that courts consider when evaluating grandparents' rights petitions. What's the next step? We build the case. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every documentation of her pattern of retaliation. By the time we're done, any judge who hears this case will understand exactly why you're concerned about her influence on Zoe. That night, as I was tucking Zoe into bed, she asked me a question that showed how much she had been absorbing about the adult conflict swirling around her. Mama, if Grandma Diane takes us to court, will a judge make me spend time with her even if I don't want to? The question broke my heart and filled me with determination simultaneously. My 8-year-old daughter was worried about being forced by legal authority to spend time with someone who had hurt her, and she was looking to me to protect her from that possibility. Quote, Zoe, judges are supposed to make decisions based on what's best for children. If a judge understands what happened and how it made you feel, they'll want to protect you too. Will you tell them about my blazer? I'll tell them everything they need to know to understand why we're concerned about your safety and happiness. Good. Because I don't want to spend time with someone who steps on my special things and tells me I'm being dramatic for having feelings about it. Once again, my daughter had cut through all the legal complexity and family politics to identify the core issue. She didn't want to be forced to have a relationship with someone who treated her badly, and she trusted me to advocate for her right to be safe from emotional abuse. Monday morning brought the formal legal papers I had been expecting. A petition for grandparents' visitation rights filed in Maricopa County Family Court, accompanied by a thick packet of supporting documents that painted me as an unstable and vindictive mother who was denying a loving grandmother access to her granddaughter without justification. Reading through Diane's court filing was like looking at a funhouse mirror version of reality. According to her petition, she had enjoyed a close and loving relationship with Zoe until I suddenly decided to cut off contact following a minor disagreement about appropriate clothing for a public event. The petition described her as a devoted grandmother who had provided emotional and financial support to our family for years, who had been actively involved in Zoe's education and development, and who was characterized as increasingly erratic and concerning, with references to my public defamation of family members on social media and my refusal to engage in reasonable conflict resolution. Reading the document, I could see how someone unfamiliar with the actual facts might view Diane as a sympathetic figure unfairly targeted by an unreasonable daughter-in-law. She had crafted a narrative that made her appear to be the mature adult, trying to heal family relationships while I appeared petty and vindictive. But she had also made a critical error. In describing the minor disagreement that had led to the conflict, she had minimized the blazer incident to the point where her own court filing contradicted the video evidence that would be submitted in response. According to her petition, we had disagreed about appropriate attire, and the blazer had been accidentally damaged during the discussion. But the video clearly showed deliberate destruction of property while a child cried, followed by dismissive comments about Zoe's emotional response. Tyler Brooks arrived at my house within 2 hours of receiving the court papers, carrying a briefcase full of response documents that he had apparently been preparing for weeks. "This is actually better than I expected," he said, spreading the court filing across my kitchen table. "She's made several claims that we can easily disprove, and she's opened the door for us to present evidence about her pattern of behavior. How do we respond? We file a comprehensive response that includes the video evidence, witness statements from everyone who has observed her behavior, documentation of her retaliation attempts, and expert testimony about the psychological impact of her actions on Zoe." Expert testimony? I've been consulting with a child psychologist who specializes in family court cases. She's reviewed the video and the other evidence, and she's prepared to testify that Diane's behavior toward Zoe constitutes emotional abuse and that continued contact would be harmful to Zoe's well-being. The idea that we would have professional support for our position was reassuring, but the prospect of putting Zoe through a court proceeding was terrifying. "Tyler, what's this going to be like for Zoe? Will she have to testify?" "Possibly, but there are ways to minimize the trauma. Arizona courts are generally very good about protecting children during family proceedings. The judge may interview Zoe privately, or may rely on the testimony of adults who have observed her reactions to her grandmother's behavior. What are our chances of winning? Based on the evidence we have, very good. But Diane is going to fight this aggressively, and she's going to try every manipulation tactic she's ever used. This is going to get ugly before it's resolved." Tuesday afternoon brought an unexpected development that demonstrated Tyler's prediction about escalation. I received a call from Child Protective Services asking me to schedule an appointment to discuss concerns that have been reported about your family's well-being. My blood turned to ice. Diane had escalated to calling Child Protective Services, just like she had done to the neighbors 15 years earlier. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I can't discuss the specifics over the phone, but someone has reported that your daughter may be experiencing emotional distress due to family conflict, and we need to follow up on that report." The appointment was scheduled for Friday afternoon, giving me 3 days to prepare for what felt like the ultimate invasion and humiliation. Someone who had deliberately traumatized my daughter was now using government agencies to investigate my fitness as a parent. I called Tyler immediately, and his response was both reassuring and infuriating. "This is exactly what I expected her to do. It's a common tactic among people like your mother-in-law. They make false reports to Child Protective Services to harass and intimidate parents who don't comply with their demands. What happens during the investigation? They'll interview you and Marcus, they'll observe Zoe, They'll inspect your home, and they'll ask about the family situation. Since there's no actual abuse or neglect, the case will be closed quickly. But the emotional toll is significant, which is exactly what Diane is hoping for. Can we use this in court? Absolutely. Making false reports to Child Protective Services is a crime, and it demonstrates exactly the kind of vindictive behavior that makes her unsuitable for unsupervised contact with Zoe. Wednesday evening brought a call from Marcus's workplace that confirmed the pattern of escalating harassment. Diane had contacted his supervisor again, this time claiming that she was concerned about Marcus's access to company vehicles given his, quote, family stress, and suggesting that his judgment might be impaired. "She's trying to get me fired," Marcus said, after explaining the conversation to me. "She's telling them I'm emotionally unstable and might be a safety risk." "What did your supervisor say?" "He told her that further contact about my employment would be considered harassment and would be reported to the police. He said the company is documenting everything in case we need to file restraining orders." The scope of Diane's retaliation was becoming clear. She was systematically attacking every aspect of our lives, trying to create professional, social, and legal consequences for our refusal to submit to her authority. She was demonstrating exactly why we couldn't trust her around Zoe. Thursday morning brought news that felt like a turning point. Tyler called with information that would change everything about our court case. "Carmen, I've been researching Diane's background more thoroughly, and I found something important. She was arrested 23 years ago for harassment and making false police reports. What happened? She had a neighbor dispute that escalated to her calling police multiple times with false complaints about noise violations, trespassing, and property damage. When the police realized the reports were fabricated, they arrested her. The charges were eventually dropped after she agreed to counseling and community service. Can we use that in court? It establishes a pattern of using false reports to authorities as retaliation against people who don't comply with her demands. Combined with her recent contacts to your husband's employer, Zoe's school, and Child Protective Services, it shows that this behavior isn't new or limited to family relationships. Tyler, we need to end this before she destroys our lives completely. We're going to end it. And when we're done, she's going to face consequences that will prevent her from doing this to anyone else." Friday's appointment with Child Protective Services was exactly as uncomfortable and invasive as I had expected, but the social worker was professional and seemed to understand quickly that the report had been made maliciously. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I want you to know that we see false reports fairly often, usually made by people trying to harass families they're in conflict with. Your daughter is clearly happy, healthy, and well cared for. What happens now? I'll file a report recommending that the case be closed with no further action. I'll also note that the report appears to have been made in bad faith, which could be relevant if this pattern continues. Can you tell me who made the report?" "I can't officially confirm that, but I can tell you that the caller claimed to be a concerned family member who was worried about emotional abuse and neglect. That evening, as I was helping Zoe with her homework, she looked up from her math worksheet and asked me a question that showed how much strength she had developed over the past month. 'Mama, when we go to court, can I tell the judge about how Grandma Diane made me feel when she stepped on my blazer?' If the judge wants to hear from you, yes. But you don't have to if you don't want to." "I want to. Because if I don't tell them, they might not understand why I don't want to spend time with her." "Zoe, you're very brave. It takes courage to speak up when someone has hurt you. You taught me that people who love you shouldn't make you feel bad about yourself. And Grandma Diane made me feel bad about my scientist outfit and my feelings." Looking at my daughter's determined face, I realized that this court case was about much more than grandparents' rights or family conflict. It was about teaching Zoe that she had the right to be protected from people who treated her badly, even when those people were family members. The stakes couldn't be higher, but for the first time since this all began, I felt completely confident that we were fighting for the right reasons. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix felt imposing under the harsh Arizona sun, its modern glass and steel facade reflecting the desert heat in shimmering waves. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before our hearing, watching other families walk through the entrance with their attorneys, briefcases, and the kind of grim expressions that suggested nobody was there by choice. Tyler Brooks had prepared me thoroughly for what to expect, but sitting there in my best Navy suit with a folder full of evidence documenting months of harassment and manipulation, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. In 2 hours, a judge would decide whether Diane Rodriguez would be granted court-ordered visitation with my daughter, despite her documented pattern of emotional abuse and vindictive retaliation. Marcus sat beside me in the passenger seat, adjusting his tie nervously and checking his phone for messages from his father. Robert had been subpoenaed to testify about his wife's behavior, a development that had apparently caused significant upheaval in their household. According to the messages Marcus had been receiving, Diane had spent the past week alternating between rage at her husband's betrayal and confidence that no judge would side with a vindictive daughter-in-law over a loving grandmother. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked, though his own voice suggested he wasn't entirely prepared for what we were about to face. "I'm ready to protect our daughter," I replied, gathering my purse and the folder that contained printouts of every threatening message, documentation of every harassment incident, and witness statements from a dozen people who had experienced Diane's controlling behavior over the years. The family court waiting area was exactly as uncomfortable as I had imagined, filled with people whose personal relationships had deteriorated to the point where government intervention was necessary. Children sat quietly with court advocates while their parents met with attorneys, everyone speaking in hushed tones about custody schedules, support payments, and visitation agreements. Tyler found us quickly, carrying his own substantial case files and wearing the confident expression of someone who had spent weeks preparing for this confrontation. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chairs beside us. "Nervous but ready. Is there any word on whether Diane is actually going to show up?" "She's here. I saw her attorney arrive about 20 minutes ago. She's scheduled to testify first, followed by your husband's father, then the child psychologist, and finally you." "What about Zoe?" "Judge Martinez has decided to interview her privately in chambers, rather than having her testify in open court. It'll be less intimidating for her, and it gives the judge a chance to assess her maturity and credibility without the pressure of a formal courtroom setting." The bailiff called our case, and we filed into a courtroom that was smaller and less formal than I had expected. Judge Martinez was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and intelligent eyes, who looked like she had heard every possible variation of family dysfunction during her years on the bench. Diane sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, a well-dressed man in his 60s who probably specialized in family law for wealthy clients. She was wearing a conservative beige dress and minimal jewelry, her makeup applied to suggest vulnerability rather than her usual polished confidence. Even her posture was different, slightly hunched forward, as if the weight of family estrangement was physically burdening her. When she took the witness stand, Diane's testimony was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation wrapped in legal language. She spoke about her deep love for Zoe, her decades of involvement in our family's life, and her heartbreak at being suddenly cut off from her granddaughter following a minor family disagreement. "Your Honor, I've been an active and loving presence in Zoe's life since the day she was born," she said, her voice trembling slightly with practiced emotion. "I've attended every school event, every birthday party, every milestone celebration. I've provided emotional support, educational enrichment, and a stable source of grandparental love that has been crucial to her development." Her attorney guided her through a carefully crafted narrative that painted the Blazer incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion by an oversensitive daughter-in-law looking for reasons to exclude family members. "Can you describe what happened at Zoe's awards ceremony, Mrs. Rodriguez?" "I was trying to help my granddaughter be comfortable during what was clearly going to be a long, warm ceremony. Her jacket looked too heavy for the weather, and I suggested she might be more comfortable without it. When I tried to help her remove it, there was some confusion, and unfortunately the jacket was damaged." "How was it damaged?" "It fell to the ground during the clothing change, and I'm afraid I accidentally stepped on it while trying to retrieve it." I was mortified, of course, and I immediately offered to replace it with something even nicer. "How did your daughter-in-law respond?" "She became extremely upset and started recording me with her phone, which was very hurtful and humiliating. I tried to apologize and explain that it was an accident, but she seemed determined to see malicious intent where none existed. Listening to Diane's testimony was like watching someone rewrite history in real time. Every detail had been carefully adjusted to remove her agency and paint her as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. The deliberate destruction of Zoe's blazer had become an accident during a clothing change. Zoe's tears had been erased entirely from the narrative. My documentation of the incident had become harassment and humiliation. Mrs. Rodriguez, have you attempted to reconcile with your family since this incident? I've tried everything, Your Honor. I've offered to pay for family counseling. I've sent letters apologizing for any misunderstanding. I've reached out to community leaders asking them to mediate this conflict. But my daughter-in-law seems determined to punish me by keeping my granddaughter away from me. And how has this separation affected you? It's been devastating. Zoe is the light of my life, and not being able to see her, to help with her homework, to attend her school events, has been the most painful experience of my life. I lie awake at night wondering if she thinks I don't love her anymore, if she's been told that I don't want to see her. The performance was convincing enough that I could see how someone without access to the actual evidence might view Diane as a sympathetic figure. She had managed to present herself as a devoted grandmother whose minor mistake had been weaponized against her by a vindictive daughter-in-law. But then Tyler began his cross-examination, and everything changed. Mrs. Rodriguez, you testified that the damage to Zoe's blazer was accidental. Is that correct? Yes, it was an unfortunate accident during a stressful moment. Are you aware that there is video evidence of this incident? I'm aware that my daughter-in-law was recording, yes. Have you seen the video? For the first time, Diane's composure cracked slightly. I've been told about it, but I haven't watched it myself. It would be too painful to relive that difficult moment. Tyler approached the court's video equipment with a tablet containing the footage that had started everything. Your Honor, I'd like to show the video evidence of the incident in question. The courtroom was silent as the video played, showing Diane forcibly removing Zoe's blazer despite both our objections, throwing it on the ground and deliberately stepping on it while Zoe cried. The audio was clear enough to hear Diane's dismissive comments about Zoe being dramatic, and her satisfaction at having asserted control over the situation. When the video ended, Judge Martinez looked directly at Diane with an expression that suggested her credibility had been severely damaged. Mrs. Rodriguez, having seen this video, do you still maintain that the damage to your granddaughter's clothing was accidental? Diane's face had gone pale, but she maintained her story. The video doesn't show the full context of what happened. I was trying to help, and things got out of hand. The video shows you throwing a child's clothing on the ground and stepping on it while she cried. How is that helping? I was frustrated, Your Honor. The whole situation had become very tense, and I reacted poorly in the moment. Mrs. Rodriguez, you initially testified that this was an accident. Now you're saying it was a reaction to frustration. Which is it? I watched Diane realize that her carefully constructed narrative was falling apart under judicial scrutiny. She had been caught in a lie about the fundamental facts of the case, and her credibility was evaporating. It was both, Your Honor. I was trying to help, but when the situation became tense, I made a mistake. Tyler pressed his advantage. Mrs. Rodriguez, since this incident, have you contacted your son's employer to express concerns about his fitness for work? I was worried about him. The family stress seemed to be affecting his professional performance. Did you suggest to his supervisor that he might be a safety risk due to his emotional state? I may have mentioned my concerns about his well-being. Did you contact your granddaughter's school to express concerns about her mother's parenting? I was worried about Zoe's emotional welfare given the family conflict. Did you file a report with Child Protective Services alleging neglect or abuse? I was concerned about the impact of all this drama on a young child. With each question, Tyler was establishing a pattern of retaliation and harassment that contradicted Diane's portrayal of herself as a loving grandmother simply seeking reconciliation. The judge was taking notes, and her expression was becoming increasingly skeptical. Mrs. Rodriguez, in your opinion, is it normal for concerned grandparents to contact employers, schools, and government agencies when they're denied access to their grandchildren? I was trying to get help for my family. Or were you trying to punish your daughter-in-law for refusing to comply with your demands? Objection, Your Honor. Diane's attorney interrupted. Argumentative. I'll rephrase, Tyler said smoothly. Mrs. Rodriguez, do you believe that your contacts with these various institutions helped or harmed your relationship with your granddaughter? Diane was silent for a long moment, clearly realizing that any answer would damage her case. If she said the contacts had helped, she was admitting to deliberately using them as tools of manipulation. If she said they had harmed the relationship, she was admitting that her actions had been counterproductive to her stated goal of reconciliation. I was doing what I thought was best for everyone involved, she said finally. Even when it meant trying to get your son fired from his job? I never tried to get him fired. Tyler pulled out printouts of the emails Diane had sent to Marcus's employer. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence communications from Mrs. Rodriguez to her son's workplace, suggesting that he was emotionally unstable and potentially unsafe. As Tyler read aloud from Diane's emails describing Marcus as stressed, unpredictable, and possibly impaired by family conflict, I could see the judge's expression hardening. This wasn't the behavior of a concerned mother. This was the behavior of someone using whatever leverage she could find to force compliance with her demands. When Robert took the stand, his testimony was devastating to his wife's case. Speaking in quiet, measured tones, he described decades of watching Diane use emotional manipulation, social pressure, and retaliation to control family members and acquaintances who didn't submit to her authority. Your Honor, I've been married to Diane for 42 years, and I love her. But I can't sit here and pretend that her behavior toward our granddaughter was acceptable, or that it was an isolated incident. Can you give the court examples of similar behavior? She's used threats, social pressure, and false complaints to punish people who disagreed with her throughout our marriage. Neighbors, co-workers, family members, anyone who challenged her authority, faced retaliation. And how did you respond to this pattern? I enabled it, Your Honor. I told myself that she was just particular about how things should be done. That people who had problems with her were being oversensitive. I made excuses for her behavior because it was easier than confronting her about it. What changed? Watching the video of what she did to Zoe. Seeing the deliberate cruelty of destroying a child's special outfit to prove a point about control. I finally understood that my silence had been protecting my wife's ability to hurt people, including our granddaughter. Mr. Rodriguez, in your opinion, would unsupervised visitation with your wife be in Zoe's best interests? Robert was quiet for a long moment, the weight of 42 years of marriage visible on his face. No, Your Honor. Not until she acknowledges her behavior and gets professional help for whatever drives her need to control and punish people. The child psychologist's testimony provided professional context for what everyone in the courtroom had witnessed through the video and testimony. Dr. Sarah Kim explained that Diane's behavior toward Zoe constituted emotional abuse designed to establish dominance and control. Children need to feel safe expressing their preferences and emotions without fear of retaliation. What we see in the video is an adult deliberately destroying something precious to a child in order to assert authority, then dismissing the child's emotional response as inappropriate. In your professional opinion, what would be the impact of forced visitation between Zoe and her grandmother? It would teach Zoe that adults have the right to hurt her without consequences, that her feelings don't matter when they conflict with adult preferences, and that she must submit to authority figures even when they treat her cruelly. Those lessons would be psychologically damaging and would undermine her ability to develop healthy relationships throughout her life. When I finally took the stand, I felt calmer than I had expected. Tyler guided me through the timeline of Diane's controlling behavior, the escalating retaliation following the awards ceremony, and my decision to prioritize Zoe's emotional safety over family harmony. Mrs. Rodriguez, why are you opposed to your mother-in-law having visitation with your daughter? Because she has shown a willingness to hurt Zoe emotionally in order to assert control, and she has shown no remorse for that behavior. I can't trust someone who deliberately destroys a child's belongings and then dismisses the child's feelings about it. Have you considered family counseling or mediation? Diane has refused to acknowledge that her behavior was wrong. Counseling can't be effective when one party won't admit there's a problem to solve. What would it take for you to reconsider your position? A genuine acknowledgement of what she did, a sincere apology to Zoe, and demonstrated commitment to respecting boundaries, and treating Zoe with kindness and respect. Diane's attorney tried to paint me as vindictive and unreasonable during cross-examination, but the evidence made his task impossible. Every question about my motives was answered by referring to the video, the pattern of retaliation, and the professional opinion about the psychological impact on Zoe. The final piece of the hearing was Judge Martinez's private interview with Zoe, which lasted about 30 minutes. When the judge returned to the courtroom, her expression was grave. "I've had the opportunity to speak with Zoe Rodriguez in chambers, and I'm impressed by her maturity, intelligence, and clarity about her experiences. She was able to articulate her feelings about the incident at her award ceremony and her current relationship with her grandmother." Judge Martinez looked directly at Diane before continuing. "This 8-year-old child told me that she doesn't feel safe with someone who destroys her special things when they're angry, and that she doesn't want to spend time with someone who tells her she's being dramatic for having feelings about being hurt." The judge's ruling was comprehensive and unequivocal. She denied Diane's petition for grandparents' visitation rights, finding that the evidence demonstrated a pattern of emotionally abusive behavior that would be harmful to Zoe's well-being. The court finds that Mrs. Rodriguez Sr. has engaged in deliberate emotional abuse of the minor child, has shown no remorse for this behavior, and has retaliated against the child's parents for protecting her from further abuse. The court further finds that Mrs. Rodriguez Sr.'s contacts with employers, schools, and government agencies constitute harassment designed to punish the family for refusing to comply with her demands. But the judge didn't stop there. She ordered Diane to cease all contact with Marcus's employer, Zoe's school, and any other institutions connected to our family. She prohibited Diane from making any reports to Child Protective Services or other agencies unless she had direct evidence of actual abuse or neglect. And she ordered Diane to attend mandatory counseling for anger management and boundary issues before any future petitions for visitation would be considered. The court is particularly troubled by Mrs. Rodriguez Sr.'s willingness to use false or misleading reports to government agencies as tools of retaliation. This behavior undermines public safety resources and constitutes potential criminal conduct. As we left the courthouse, Diane stood with her attorney near their car, her composed facade finally cracking completely. She was crying real tears for the first time I had ever witnessed, but they seemed to be tears of rage and humiliation rather than genuine remorse. She made one last attempt to control the narrative, calling out across the parking lot as we walked toward our car. "This isn't over, Carmen. You've destroyed a family over your vindictive need to be right." I turned to face her one final time, feeling none of the anger or fear that had dominated my emotions for months. Instead, I felt something like pity for a woman who had spent decades hurting people and was now facing the first real consequences of her actions. "Diane, I didn't destroy this family. I protected my daughter from someone who was hurting her. If you had treated Zoe with kindness and respect, we wouldn't be here today. I love that child more than you'll ever understand. No, you love controlling that child. There's a difference." 3 months after the court hearing, our lives had settled into a peaceful routine that felt almost strange after years of walking on eggshells around family events. Zoe was thriving in school, her confidence fully restored, and she rarely mentioned her grandmother, except to express relief that she didn't have to worry about someone criticizing her choices or destroying her belongings. Marcus had struggled initially with the guilt of having testified against his mother, but he had started individual counseling to work through decades of enabling behavior and family dysfunction. His relationship with his father had actually grown stronger, as Robert had also begun attending therapy and working to understand his own role in enabling Diane's abusive behavior. "Dad called today. Marcus told me one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. He's filed for separation. He said he can't go back to pretending that Mom's behavior is normal, and she's refusing to attend the counseling that the court ordered. How do you feel about that?" "Sad, but not surprised. She's never taken responsibility for anything in her life. I don't think she's going to start now." The Facebook post that had started everything had been shared over 10,000 times and had generated hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories about toxic family members. Several people had reached out to thank me for giving them the courage to set boundaries with relatives who had been abusing their children or grandchildren. One message particularly stood out, from a woman whose mother-in-law had been emotionally abusive toward her children for years. Watching your video helped me realize that I didn't have to keep subjecting my kids to someone who made them feel bad about themselves just because she was family. I've cut off contact, and my children are so much happier and more confident. Thank you for showing me that protecting our children is more important than keeping peace with toxic relatives. 6 months later, I received an unexpected email from Diane's sister in Tucson, where Diane had been staying since Robert filed for separation. Carmen, I wanted you to know that Diane has been telling everyone here that you're keeping Zoe away from her out of spite, and that the court case was unfair because you manipulated the evidence. She's been trying to get family members to pressure you into allowing visitation, claiming that you're damaging Zoe by keeping her from her loving grandmother. The email continued with information that was both predictable and disappointing. Diane had learned nothing from the court proceedings and was continuing to rewrite history to avoid taking responsibility for her actions. I thought you should know that she's also been talking about hiring a different attorney to file another petition for grandparents' rights. She's convinced that she just needs a better lawyer to get a different outcome. I forwarded the email to Tyler Brooks, who responded quickly with legal advice about documenting any further harassment and reminders about the court's explicit warnings about retaliation. But, honestly, I wasn't worried anymore. Diane could hire a dozen attorneys and file 100 petitions, but the evidence of her behavior was documented and undeniable. More importantly, Zoe was old enough now to articulate her own feelings about the relationship, and those feelings were clear. A year after the court hearing, Zoe and I were working together in the small garden we had planted in our backyard, harvesting vegetables that she had been growing for another science project. She was 12 now, more mature and confident than ever, and she had recently been accepted into an advanced academic program for gifted students. "Mama, do you ever think about Grandma Diane?" she asked, as we picked tomatoes and peppers that would become dinner. "Sometimes. Do you?" "Not really. I mean, I remember her, but I don't miss spending time with someone who made me feel bad about myself. Do you think you'll ever want to see her again?" Zoe considered the question seriously, her hands still working among the tomato plants. "Maybe when I'm older, if she learns how to be nice to people. But right now, I like that I don't have to worry about someone being mean to me at family gatherings. You know that your feelings about this might change as you get older, right? And that would be okay?" "I know, but I also know that nobody has the right to treat me badly just because they're related to me. You taught me that." Watching my daughter confidently express her boundaries and prioritize her own well-being, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the difficult choices we had made. The court case had been expensive, emotionally draining, and socially complicated, but it had given Zoe something invaluable: the knowledge that she deserved to be treated with respect and kindness, even by family members. 2 years later, I received a Christmas card from Robert, who had finalized his divorce and moved into a small apartment near our neighborhood. The card included a photo of him with Zoe at her recent science fair, where she had won first place again with a project about renewable energy. "Thank you for helping me find the courage to stand up for what's right," he had written inside the card. Zoe is lucky to have a mother who protects her from people who would hurt her, even when those people are family. The note continued with updates about his life, his therapy progress, and his relationship with Zoe, which had flourished once it was free from Diane's controlling influence. I see Diane occasionally at church events, and she still maintains that she was wrongfully treated by the courts and by our family. I don't think she'll ever understand that her behavior was the problem, not everyone else's reaction to it. But the most important part of the note was about Zoe herself. She's grown into such a confident, articulate young woman who knows her own mind and isn't afraid to stand up for herself. That's your influence, Carmen. You taught her that she deserves respect and kindness, and that lesson will serve her well throughout her life. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that the blazer incident had been a gift in disguise. It had forced us to confront family dysfunction that had been escalating for years, had given us legal documentation of abusive behavior, and had ultimately protected Zoe from continued emotional abuse. More importantly, it had taught my daughter that she had value, that her feelings mattered, that people who truly loved her would care about her well-being more than their own pride or authority. The $900 house from the story I had heard years earlier had been a symbol of choosing independence over family approval. Zoe's torn blazer had become our symbol of choosing protection over peace, accountability over harmony, and our daughter's emotional safety over maintaining relationships with people who were willing to hurt her. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the right decisions, and sometimes protecting the people you love means disappointing the people who claim to love you. The blazer that Diane had destroyed to prove a point about control had ultimately proven a much more important point about love. Real love protects. Real love respects boundaries. And real love puts the well-being of children above the egos of adults. Today, when I see Zoe confidently presenting her research projects, standing up for herself in social situations, and refusing to accept disrespectful treatment from anyone, I know that our decision to fight for her emotional safety was worth every difficult moment of the legal battle. She learned that she matters, that her feelings are valid, and that people who love her should make her feel safe and valued, not small and criticized. Those lessons will serve her far better than maintaining a relationship with someone who was never going to change would have. Some bridges are worth burning when the other side leads to people who would hurt your children. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let family dysfunction continue into the next generation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.